across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good afternoon. Yeah, welcome to the home of common sense. Thank you to Julia. She's back tomorrow at 10 o'clock. So, talking of tomorrow, that's when voters across the country will contest thousands of council seats, mayoral positions, and the entirety of who governs Wales and Scotland. Pollsters anticipate a disastrous result for Sir Keir Starmer's Labour Party, despite Labour's massive 2024 general election victory. Turnout was exceptionally low. The indifference, of course, is alarming ahead of these local elections, where Labour is vulnerable in former strongholds, and turnout is usually only around 35%. With that in mind, should voting now be compulsory? Also this afternoon, ministers are allegedly planning a Trojan horse plot to replace Keir Starmer with Andy Burnham after the local elections. The plan involves a sympathetic North West Labour MP stepping down, possibly next week, to create a parliamentary seat for the Greater Manchester Mayor, and Starmer will not be able to block it. Who is on manoeuvres? Who is looking out for who? And where does that story end? Or when, perhaps, is the salient question. And an investigation found that civil servants are faking office attendance, really, with some failing to come into the office for years. Years! No one even knew they worked there. They never showed up. What kind of life is it over there at Civil Service HQ? Everything you need to know. We'll bring you all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. So here's a question, and with those elections just really a matter of hours away, how about this for an idea?
In Australia and some other countries, there's mandatory voting. It would be transformative if everybody voted.
Yeah, if everybody voted. Voting in the UK, of course, is often treated a bit, gym membership in January. Everybody agrees it's important, but turnout suggests mainly quiet and often avoided. In the 2019 general election, turnout hovered around about 67%. So a third of eligible voters chose the sofa over the ballot box. Now, that's a lot of people effectively saying, I'll just live with whatever happens. Compulsory voting could fix this democratic shrug. Countries like Australia do it.
We're lucky in Australia. We've had for 100 years plus compulsory voting and preferential voting, and that combination brings politics to the centre.
And Belgium already requires citizens to vote as well. And guess what? In those countries, turnout regularly exceeds 90%. Now, in Australia, if you miss the vote, it's not a big penalty. I don't quite understand the whole idea of making it compulsory. You get fined about $20, 20 Australian dollars, which I think is about 15 quid or something, less than the cost of a takeaway. Repeat offenders might face higher penalties. In Belgium, it's slightly stricter, with fines increasing for repeated absences and even potential disenfranchisement after multiple failures to vote. Nothing says civic duty like a gentle financial nudge. Now, critics argue compulsory voting infringes on freedom, but you could counter that democracy works best when everybody shows up, even if they're reluctant, like at a family wedding, for example. If nothing else, it would ensure that election day becomes a kind of national habit rather than a sort of an optional extra, which is what we have at the moment. And who knows, with everyone voting, we might finally retire the phrase, the silent majority, because they'd no longer be silent, just mildly annoyed in a queue. Now, I get all of that. I understand democratic country can't compel people to vote. When you consider that council elections often get 35% of people, and you look at that and you do have to draw on some rather obvious sort of analogies, where there are countries in the world where you can't vote. There is no vote. There's no democratic vote. And here we have the ability to do it. The leaflets come through your door. Your little voting card comes through your door. And it gets to the day and you go, I can't be asked. I'm not even bothering to vote. I'll let others decide. That's not a good look, really, is it? And 35%, even a general election, 67%. A third of people who could vote at the 2019 general election didn't bother showing up. And I wonder about that group. I do get that you might say, well, there's nobody I want to vote for. I think you can write on your card, none of the above. It becomes arguably a spoilt ballot, but it's your right to. But at least you went. You registered in some respect. 0344 499 1000. Should it be compulsory to vote in this country? We have those local and in Scotland and Wales, national elections for those places. We've got mayoral elections going on. I think there's 5,000 council seats in England alone. How many people are actually going to show up? And if it was compulsory, would that alter the democratic process? Would it make democracy more authentic? Would you sense that these results are more representative of people if it was compulsory to vote? 0344 499 1000. Chloe Dobbs is with us, political commentator on this and the other big stories of the day. Afternoon to you.
Afternoon.
Do you know, I was hoping it would be you sitting there because I just suddenly realised that since you walked in here, I hadn't looked round to who was. I saw somebody walk in
so in the
under
zone,
a camera.
I'm
in the zone. I'm in the monologue zone, and I thought, what if I turn round and it's, I don't know, Oscar Redrup or something sitting there? Not looking like that, I would imagine.
Far better than anyone else, of course.
Yes, even if you say it yourself.
I'm joking.
Listen, compulsory voting, it does get discussed once in a while, doesn't it? Should it be compulsory to vote? And my instincts say it's a democratic country, it's a free society. The idea that your government make you do this stuff is terrible. But I do understand the persuasive arguments around making it compulsory.
There are arguments on either side. I don't think it's black and white, but I think I would fall on the side of saying it should not be compulsory. So I think regardless of whether you have a perfect turnout or not, all states have legitimacy problems. So even if everybody votes, let's say, I know things are, we've got various different parties going on now, things are quite fluid, but in most of the time it's Labour or the Conservatives. Even if everybody votes, there are plenty of people there who are voting but sort of begrudgingly because they don't actually like either of the options. So for example, if you don't think that a state should have the right to take your money, i.e. to tax you, there is no option on the table, right? You've got two parties that both have very high taxes, and this most of the time the strategy is you win from the centre and you end up choosing between two fairly centrist parties. So I don't think that makes a state legitimate. Even if everybody votes for one of those two centrist parties, there are still huge swathes of people who reject what these parties are doing. I mean, I normally look at it from a sort of going back to the state of nature. What is the purpose of the state? What do we need the state for? And there are many things that a government does today that you wouldn't necessarily deem necessary in a state of nature, and it means that they're not necessarily legitimate to do it. And also the other big thing is if people vote, there are actually very few voters that are actually what you might call a rational voter. The vast majority of people, although they might be interested enough in politics to go vote, there's only a small proportion of the population that is actually really interested in politics and really understands what all the parties stand for. So you're lucky enough to have enough people in a society who are willing to read the news enough and at least read the count to be informed enough.
But you would be one of those people. Well, you know, because you've been engaged in politics, you were interested in it at a young age. You know, when little girls were playing with Barbies, you were reading Thatcher's biography, for goodness sake. I mean, that's fantastic.
I haven't read Thatcher's biography, but I don't expect, as much as that's a passion for me, I don't expect everybody to do that. Most people, they've got a job to do in nothing to do with politics, and then they go home, they've got a family to look after, they've got bills to pay, and that's their main concern. And I don't blame them for not wanting to put a load of time into researching an election for which the likelihood of their vote, one vote being the thing that changes the result of it, being infinitesimally small. So you're always going to have a lot of irrational voters. If on top of that you say all of the people who don't engage in politics at all, they read none of it, they've got no idea, need to vote as well, then you're going to have more issues with people electing people who are not good leaders.
This is apparently going to be the most social media driven set of elections. Now, there's a problem with this. So this is mostly the younger cohorts of society. But part of the research, and I'm slightly paraphrasing here, is also one of the most ill-informed for this reason, because a lot of young people are digesting a lot of politics that suits their beliefs, but they're not seeking out alternatives. So they're going on social media, they follow, you know, Zach Polanski or whoever, Corbyn, whoever it might be, on Instagram. So they're digesting a lot of that, but they're not picking up the Telegraph once in a while and reading the editorial. They're not having a look at what Nigel Farage is saying about reform. They're just simply in the echo chamber and making a decisive vote based on that. So it's good that more younger people might vote, but their thinking behind it might not be as sound as that first appears.
Yeah, and it's hard to seek out different opinions on social media.
Yeah.
I try to actively go and follow some left-wing accounts on social media to try and mix up my feed a bit, but it seems the algorithm seems to figure out what your view is and then just feed you 99% of it what you agree with. And not only does that mean that people are ill-informed, but it also means that people are becoming more and more divided, and this is why you've got people screaming and shouting at each other, people launching assassination attempts on Donald Trump, for example, because when 99% of your feed is super left-wing, you come across someone who is a Republican or a Reform supporter and you think that they are some sort of Nazi extremist and they need to be wiped off the face of the earth. I mean,
because you created that divide.
We will end up with some crazy civil war if something is not done about that. So I think with social media, the issue, because people talk about fake news, I think the issue with it is not so much the fact that some of the stuff they see is not correct information. It's the fact that they're not getting the breadth of opinion when they look through their social media feeds. When you just looked at a mix of papers and your idea of, say, what percentage of people are, you know, right wing was on the basis of the people that you chat to in your day-to-day life, then you didn't think that someone with an opposing view to you was extreme. And I think that's how you've ended up with this sort of centre ground.
But why have we got so many people not? I mean, you don't have to be fully engaged in it. I mean, there's lots of different reasons why some people vote because there's a kind of lineage thing going on, you know, down the lines. You know, my granddad was Labour, my dad was Labour, so I'm going to be. There's a bit of that going on at the moment with a very kind of divisive way that we sort of do business in this country. You've got people who will be evangelically wedded to Zach Polanski for perhaps unfathomable reasons in any other world, but they will love that idea. So they're almost galvanised to vote on that. And then similarly with reform, there is also a sort of an inbuilt instinctive compulsion to say, this is the moment we've really got to get reform in. So those voters might mobilise in greater numbers, both the Greens and Reform, because it's those two parties that are sort of coming up on the outside as to and potentially dominating eventually that middle ground.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people they've really given up on politicians, and you've got some people who still have a bit of hope. So they say, oh, well, the Tories and Labour have failed us, but I want to give one of these fresh new parties who seem like they're not from the old establishment. There's something new about them. I might give it one more shot. I might vote for if you're on the left. Maybe it's the Greens if you're on the right. Maybe it is Reform. But I come across a lot of people who just say, you know what? They're all the same. I'm sick of it. I don't believe that.
They're all the same. All corrupt.
I don't believe that Reform or the Greens are going to be any different, and I'm just not going to bother voting. And it's very sad that we've got to that point where politicians have failed people so much that people just can't trust them at all. There are always going to be scandals. There's always going to be corruption, but it would be nice to have people at least engaged enough to think that at least one of the parties, they might have a chance of someone decent.
Would we get better politicians or better politics or better debates if it was compulsory? If you did, I mean, Australia, they fine you $20, and I'm sure half local authorities forget to even do that. You know, it's not big. If the stormtroopers came round your house on election day, knocked at your door, 10 to 10, you haven't voted yet. Get yourself down to the ballot box.
First of all, how you would enforce that, I'm not sure exactly how.
It could only be months afterwards, couldn't it, when they realised that number 67
sounds a bit
Acacia
complicated.
Avenue
Conducting elections
voted.
as it is complicated enough. But I think that things that are mandatory become a chore in your head. So if you're doing something by choice, you're more likely to be proud of it. Whereas if you're, I mean, any kid will know this. The things that your parents force you to do, you see as a chore and you don't want to do, and the things that you do by your own choice, you feel proud of doing and you feel excited about.
35%, Chloe. 35, less than 35% is a common number for participation in local elections. So 2/3 of people who could have a vote don't vote in local elections.
But
A third in national elections.
I kind of
Why
get
are
it
we
sometimes
why are so
because,
many people so disengaged?
Look, I'll be honest. I will go to the polls on Thursday, but am I that excited about it? Have I read a huge amount about who's standing in my local area? Not really, to be honest, because yes, I'm a Reform supporter, but I have a Lib Dem council that actually, there aren't any crises in the area.
Sure.
The streets are kept really clean. Everything seems to be running pretty smoothly. So I think I'm not really too bothered whether the Lib Dems stay or not. Maybe it'd be nice to have a couple of people from Reform holding them to account. But if there's no crisis and you don't see, oh, I'm really angry because the streets are full of potholes and the bins never get collected, then there's less impetus to go to that. There aren't really, well, luckily where I live, there aren't really any
That's
issues.
a good point. On local elections, and well, even national as well, I've known this both way round. A mate of mine who was an ardent lefty voted for the Tory MP because the Tory MP was quite a good constituency MP.
Yeah.
And said, well, on that basis, I'm going to vote for the Tory. Because if you think about it, you're not voting, you're meant to be voting for the individual to represent your views.
Yeah, we had that in Cornwall, where it was full of Lib Dems for ages, but we turned it completely blue when I was a Tory supporter, and the MP Steve Double for St Austell and Newquay, who was the MP at the time, and also people like Scott Bann in North Cornwall, they won not because the people who voted for them were traditionally Tories, but they were just incredible local MPs who dealt with any issue you brought them in the local area like that, and so they were able to turn the place blue.
That is the question. Should it be compulsory to... Well, there's two things to this, really. Should it be compulsory to vote? 0344 499 1000. Would you support the idea that it was mandatory? And the second thing is, which has just flown on from that conversation with Chloe, is the disengagement. Why are people disengaged? Why are people not feeling that the democratic process is either relevant to them or the sense that it won't make any difference anyway? It's that kind of thinking. How radical are the manifestos or the local pledges when it comes to your town council between that? Is it a chasm between Tory, Labour and Lib Dems, to pick the obvious three? Does it make a massive difference at local level? Is that the thinking? Why are people not interested in the democratic process? 0344 499 1000. Lines are open on that. And we're going to come back to that Trojan horse story as well with Chloe in just a couple of moments. 1:20. This is Talk.
Neil Kinnock felt the Labour Party. He changed the Labour Party. He thought he might be the Prime Minister in 92. We didn't win. But he had that feeling for the Labour Party. That doesn't exist with Keir Starmer, I'm afraid. Look, I often say, Jeremy, the Labour Party is the nearest thing I've got to a religion. But if the Labour Party was the Church of England, Keir Starmer would be the chief executive of it.
Well, he's the God. It means he's your God right now.
Well, he's not the spiritual leader, is my point.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
So this in from Dan in Hartlepool, who says, I'm completely on the other side of this spectrum. Rather than compulsory voting, I'd say that anyone who actively isn't working and has been on benefits for longer than a set period of time, I would remove their vote. People with fresh criminal convictions also. Basically, anyone who isn't actively working in this country's best interest shouldn't have a vote on how the country is run. I mean, I get the notion of that. I understand the notion of that, because there's advocates who want prisoners to have the vote as well. There's another element, which at the moment they haven't got, have they? But it was voted on, I think, under Cameron. I think because there was an EU directive, wasn't there, that I think the EU said, no, you have to let prisoners vote or something, and Cameron fought it off, and something like that.
Yeah, it's debatable. I mean, for example, would we say someone like Lucy Connolly in prison should have been able to vote? Maybe, I mean, there are some people in prison who are there for quite a short space of time for something fairly minor. They're not all rapists and murderers behind bars.
That's true. And some people shouldn't be in jail at all.
Yeah, and then on the point of people who are on benefits, again, sounds good in principle, but then in reality you're going to have people saying, oh well, you hate disabled people because you're not allowing these genuinely disabled people to vote. It would get quite messy, I think, just pragmatically.
True. Brad in Cambridge says, Collins, you idiot! He doesn't actually say that at all. He says, hi Ian. No, it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be compulsory to vote. We live in a democracy where free choice needs to be protected. It would also lead to millions of totally uninformed votes. People voting for the candidate with their best hair or teeth would be a nightmare. If you can't be bothered to inform yourself and vote, you lose the right to complain.
Oh, Zach Polanski won't do well if people are voting on the basis of best teeth.
What's all that about? I mean, mate, get your gnashers sorted out, fella.
So apparently he has a special thing that means you still have your milk teeth. You don't ever lose them. That's what Kevin says.
He's still got baby's teeth?
Yeah, he's still got milk teeth.
Really?
Well, this is what Kevin claims.
Does he suck his thumb as well at night? I don't know.
We'll hold Kevin to account on that.
Zach Polanski has baby's teeth.
He does seem like a man-child, doesn't he? He hasn't really grown up. He's still got the politics of a teenager.
What an insult at a political rally, isn't it? Oi, baby teeth. It doesn't really sit up there with, oi, Nazi!
If that claim is wrong, we blame Kevin O'Sullivan. So just in case.
I like the idea, but Zach, sort your gnashers out, fella, and your hair and general face. But that's maybe unfair.
Are teeth called gnashers?
Now, you must have heard that before.
No.
You've never heard gnashers?
No.
How have you got to the age of 38 and not heard the word gnashers?
I'm not 38. Excuse me. Excuse me.
I apologise. Let's move to this one. After the local elections, of course, ministers are reporting or reportedly considering a Trojan horse strategy to get Andy Burnham into the corridors of Westminster. Now, the plan may involve a Labour MP, because this is how it's meant to happen. A Labour MP in a very safe Labour seat has to stand down, then they have a by-election, and Burnham becomes the candidate. This could happen as soon as next week, clearing the way for Burnham to return to Westminster. Let's have a listen. He's the current mayor of Greater Manchester, of course, Andy Burnham, speaking on the issue of Labour leadership.
MPs were in touch with me, but let me also give an honest explanation of what I said to those MPs. It's not up to me. It's not my decision. That's a matter for you, for the party in Parliament. And also I said to them, and it's got to be about more than a personality contest. You know, the Tories were just constantly going through this at the latter end of the time that they were in government. It's got to be about a plan, a proper plan for the country, and a proper plan to beat reform.
Right, we know there is a plan, all right? You'd have to be a half-wit not to read. There's some kind of plan. I'm not saying it's written down and they're about to go action, and then all of a sudden he's going to step down and he's going to... There is a plan, right? They want Burnham in it. The only way they can do that is by finding a plan. It might be fragile, but all
with this Andy Burnham plan, I'll believe it when I see it.
He wants to be Prime Minister. By the way, I have no idea what the qualifications are for Andy Burnham being the Prime Minister.
The fact that he was trying to run in that Gorton and Denton by-election clearly showed he wants to be leader of the Labour Party, but he's had quite a few times where he's sort of started making an attempt and then he walks away with his tail between his legs and it doesn't go to plan. Now, it's very complicated complicated simply because he doesn't have a seat in Parliament. I'd say this man is probably the most likely to become the next Prime Minister if he had a seat in Parliament, but he simply doesn't have one.
Someone's going to stand down for him.
No, but the NEC has to approve, right? Remember what happened here was the NEC that blocked him from standing in the Gorton and Denton by-election. That was significantly so on the basis that it would force there to be another mayoralty election in Manchester, which would be a huge upheaval, and also
expensive.
This is a huge risk because there aren't really any safe Labour seats anymore. So any seat he stands in, there's a possibility that he loses that seat and the mayoralty in Manchester could go to a different party as well. It's all for the taking these days. Labour are just plummeting in the polls so badly.
Yeah.
And then he's got no job, no career, and he's ended up handing both the mayoralty and a seat to another party in what some may see as a selfish attempt to become Prime Minister.
No, but you see, here's what apparently the other part of the agreement, because I've been drilling down on the details of this, Chloe. So a Labour MP stands down.
Yep.
Burnham is selected. Starmer doesn't stand in his way this time and has a word in the shell-like of the NEC and says, don't stand in the way. The agreement is tacit. It's not said out loud even by Starmer, but give Keir another year and then you can make your way in.
He can't last another year.
We all know that, but Andy Burnham, he'll hang around, won't he?
I don't think Keir Starmer is the sharpest tool, but I do think he will be smart enough to see exactly what is happening here and know that he'll come in and then maybe Starmer will get, say, a month max, and then sure enough, he'll be trying to get rid of him. I mean, we're hearing that Starmer has instructed all of his colleagues that their main mission is stop Burnham at all costs at the moment. He knows exactly what is going on. You don't need to be a genius to see what it is. So I don't think that Burnham's going to find a way into the Commons, but he may be noticing the fact that Angela Rayner's affairs with HMRC haven't been wrapped up yet, as she was hoping that they would be by the end of next week, which means that she's potentially out of the race if she doesn't get that sorted soon. So HMRC are holding a lot of power here as to the future of the Prime Minister, the future Prime Minister of this country.
This one from Betty, who says, Collins, you narrow-minded half-wit. Actually, Betty doesn't say that at all. Says, hi, Ian. Should be mandatory or £1,000 fine for not voting. Would guaranteed register and sort out who is legal and illegal. Same with all public transport. I'd like in the USA to root out, I'm just reading it verbatim, root out several million illegals. Also jail for allowing family members over voting age in the same booth. Who's watching that tomorrow? Apparently that didn't happen, did it? Do you remember last time they were saying, there was people in the same booth and then they mysteriously couldn't find any evidence of it. Let's just do this story because I want to get this one in because it's very important, Chloe. A Labour-backed taxpayer-funded guidance is advising nurseries, I'm not making this up, nurseries to report children for racism. This includes
to the police,
contacting the police if the incident, because it might be a hate crime. This is ridiculous, especially when you consider that kids think like this.
About in school.
Martin Luther King Jr.
Martin Luther King Jr. What'd he do?
He died for sins.
No, that was Jesus who died for the sins. But that's what a kid's brain does. You know, they've heard one thing, they've tried to connect it up. They don't know stuff. I've got a 7-year-old. He's a beautiful kid. I love my little 7-year-old. Nut job, frankly. You know, his knowledge is, basically zero on important stuff.
A kid that says something racist is they're just saying something by accident, and the way that you find out what is acceptable to say and what is not acceptable today is basically is often just trial and error. They say something stupid and then they get told off for it and then they know not to say it again. I mean, give them a bit.
But who came up? So Welsh nurseries have been advised to report racist incidents to the police, with childcare workers told to call 999 in
emergency services aren't stretched enough.
hate crime situations. Somebody somewhere, I know I always make this, somebody in a boardroom, Chloe, someone came up with this idea and said, here's a good idea. They came into work that day with that suggestion.
If a kid turns up to school with a backpack backpack with a bomb in it, yes, call 999. But if they've just accidentally said an inappropriate word, why on earth are you bothering the emergency services? This is nuts. Have a word with the parents if it happens multiple times. Also, if a child is repeatedly saying racist things, it probably doesn't say much about the child, but says something about their parents' point of view. Their parents are the ones you should be concerned about. Because the parents feed to their kids and then the kids end up believing it.
Roy in Birmingham says, Collins, why are you even allowed on the radio? Your views are ridiculous. Doesn't actually say that. He says, hi, Ian. Regarding compulsory voting, I'm all for it on 2 conditions. None of the above is an actual option on the ballot paper, because some people do say if you can put that in there, you've registered your disquiet with the system. Yeah. And number 2, party manifestos are legally binding documents. Well, they're sort of not legally binding, are they? You're meant to aspire to. But the House of Lords can't usurp a manifesto pledge.
They can, but there is a long-standing sort of tradition that you don't do so. There are always going to be things change, wars happen and all sorts where you have to be flexible with a manifesto. It's when politicians completely throw the manifesto out the window, like Labour Party basically have, that's going to annoy people. But if you said you're legally bound if you break any of these promises, that you're going to end up, I don't know, in prison or something. I mean, no one would sign up to be a politician.
So, on balance, final question, compulsory voting, yes or no?
No.
OK, Chloe Dobbs with us. Thank you, Chloe. Good to see you. More from you on the way. 03444991000. Everything we just talked about there, from racist nurseries to the big one, compulsory voting. Should voting be compulsory? Would it change the authenticity of democracy in this country? Lines are open. 1:30. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. Just coming up on 25 to 2. Phil in Norfolk says, I work on the basis that all politicians are liars, self-serving, and most are crooked. Therefore, I never vote. I'm 80, and I've seen and heard it all before. I get that as well. I get that. Do we expect too much, however, when it comes to change? Somebody said to me a little while ago now, but it sort of made sense when we talk about this. What was the sort of buzzword that was given to it? It wasn't the omni party, was it? The 2-party system. They're all, Labour, Tories. It's essentially the same thing. And somebody said it was fairly involved and quite senior in that world of kind of running countries. Said, actually, there is a template, and you can throw on some gloss. You can clearly alter things for a political party kind of identity or flavour of. So the Tories might, historically, stereotypically speaking, Tories might drop tax, Labour might hike tax, etc. You can do a bit of that. It's never massive. Never so huge that you go, wow, we're living in a totally different system to the one we used to. It's more or less the same, and there's a good reason it's always more or less the same, is because there is only one way to more or less, bar the veneer of your own political identity, there's only really one way to run a country, because it's quite a complicated gig. And if you start changing all of that, nothing happens. Is that true? Does that resonate with you? Labour, of course, are widely expected to have a right old bruising tomorrow. We know that in 2024, they secured 411 seats out of 650, one of the largest single-party totals in electoral history. But the low turnout was the most striking feature of the recent election, with estimations showing that only around half of voting age population participated. So share of vote, I think I'm right in saying Keir Starmer's share of his vote was less than Jeremy Corbyn's was. What does that tell us? Why do people not engage in politics? And would making voting compulsory change that? Let's speak with Giles Dilnot, editor at Conservative Home. And Giles, you've worked in journalism, you've worked in government, so you've seen all kind of different angles on this story. It comes up once in a while. Does it make it compulsory? Prisoners having votes, all of that kind of stuff. We know there are some countries, we mentioned Australia as the obvious go-to example, Belgium also make it compulsory. Firstly, would you support the idea? And if you do, would it make a difference?
Absolutely not. I don't support the idea at all. Funnily enough, when it was my job to go around the country and visit all the parts that would be voting in a general election for a number of general elections, I remember 2005, I think it was, and I met with some surfers. We tried to choose people that you couldn't guess what their politics would be before we spoke to them. So yes, we would arrange them by hobby. And I was with some surfers on the Gower Peninsula in Wales, and one of them was Australian. And she was expressing her politics, but she didn't actually have a vote in our 2005 election. What she did tell me was that she'd been fined in the UK for not going back to Australia to vote in hers.
That's a big ask, isn't it?
And I was like, yeah, I thought that was kind of harsh. But there you are. As you said, Australia has a compulsory voting here. And then I thought about it. And you are essentially, or you just have been talking about a failure of belief and faith in politics. And I think this is politics' problem, not voters' problem. It is up to politics to engage the public and the electorate, to allow them and to persuade them that they wish to exercise their right to vote, because they also have a right to choose who they want elected or to choose not to vote. So low turnouts, we've seen it. It's been a trend for a while. Also, this sort of, I don't like our politicians these days. They're all out for themselves. And you had a gentleman, I think he wrote in, who said he was 80.
Yes.
Hundreds of years we've had this attitude towards politicians. This is not new. We have always been, and I think it's a bit of a British thing, slightly cynical about our politicians and about who they are and why they do what they do. And the fact that there's another element to what you were saying, which does damage faith in politics, is there isn't much wriggle room in running a country. It's blooming hard. I've seen it for myself from the front line. It's extremely complicated. And what the public don't want to accept, and I really understand why they don't want to, because you don't want to be told this is really difficult. Maybe it was just you were just bad at it, everything is trade-offs.
Yeah.
It's always the least worst option. And actually, some of the things that you think would be fantastic are completely contradictory to other things that you also believe. It is nigh on impossible to please all of the people all of the time. Sometimes, of course, you find, as the Tories did in 2024, that you haven't pleased many people any of the time.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, it's difficult. It creates an atmosphere that politicians don't do what they say, because they're trying to promise you something and sell a belief and a vision.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, trades-offs, reality, just don't make that come to fruition in the way you want it. And everyone gets disappointed. So I get it. But making people vote, I don't think solves that problem. What you're really looking for, what we're all looking for, is somebody who can change it and deliver. And of course, at the moment, with these local elections coming up, there is a party that's offering that. I'd be very interested to see whether they can break that mould.
Indeed. You always have to mention the Liberal Democrats, don't you? But there, of course, there's a strange thing. It may not be original, what I sense is happening, Charles, but it's certainly got a greater profile, and that is sort of the emotional voting thing. People who vote because they have a feeling rather than necessarily they've read policies and bits and pieces. The three bits that are interesting to this for me. Let's start in Scotland. The SNP. Half an hour ago, the SNP were in the bin. We thought half of them were going to be in jail. They were going to be consigned to the dustbin. History authors were already penning biographies about, do you remember the SNP? Now they're back and predicted to do remarkably well and, running Scotland with a majority possibly from tomorrow. So there's that just sort of happened really quickly, arguably perhaps due to the ineptitude of who they're up against. That would be a reasonable contribution to that argument. Then there, of course, is Reform. Now, Reform are, relatively speaking, a new party, but, they've managed to ride high in the polls and look to do pretty well tomorrow. But perhaps more salient than that, more prominent, is the Green Party, whose leader isn't actually a member of Parliament, whose leader doesn't, if you like, not to body shame anybody, doesn't look like it's not some dashing knight in shining armour who's come along with great ideas. They were nowhere half an hour ago, and now they're predicted to do rather well. In fact, in some national predictions, they could get 70-odd seats at a general election out of nowhere. Now, that's only mostly, I would suggest, happened because the young vote is more engaged with Green policies, and they've decided that Zach Balansky is the next step away from Jesus himself.
There is something going on, and it's palpably going on. It's actually happening. Is that vibe politics works? But you listed Reform, SNP, arguably, and the Greens, all either avowedly or actually do conform a lot to a vibe politics that's populist. It's tell people what they want. Yeah. Try to give them what they want. Good luck with that, but do it, and it's working. It's working because people are tired of the closed shop of a two-party system. They're clearly saying to people that we want something different. And what's interesting is when you say, I actually genuinely don't believe these people will be competent enough to do this, or what they're promising is the moon on a stick, a lot of people will come to you, I don't care, I want to give them a chance. That's vibe politics. That's feeling, that's gut. And frankly, Ian, who are you and I to tell them they're wrong?
Yep.
I think it's a mistake. I know that governing is technical, complicated, boring, and difficult. But who are we to tell them they're wrong? They are the ultimate masters because they are the electorate. And forcing them to choose between us, I just think makes us as politicos, me as a conservative, makes us look weak. It's up to us to persuade them, to give them a reason to tick our box, not to go, you do it because it's good for you. I mean, that is literally against every instinct I have.
Yes, no, I get it. I saw a post from, not completely relevant to this, but it feeds into it, Charles, a post by the journalist Tim Stanley of The Telegraph, who was talking about, I think, something they did on the Telegraph Daily podcast, which threw up that what Tim described as the statistic we've all known that when it comes to left-wing, right-wing, culturally people are right-wing, economically they are left-wing. And he says that's been the case for years. And that one always surprises me. Was that always a known thing when you were working in government? That
I'm not sure I buy it.
Neither do I. The idea that most people are economically... I could almost see that stat the other way round, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm not sure I completely buy the thesis. I mean, there are a lot of people who say, that general feeling that most people are slightly to the left or slightly to the right of Blair, and that's pretty much where the mass is. That's not true anymore either. We are in a different political arena, a different political landscape now. So I'm not sure some of these generalizations really fit. I mean, I would say this is because a lot of Conservatives say that the problem they've got is their branding and their history, but the truth of the matter is that most people are instinctively conservative in their outlook.
Yeah.
They believe in the same things. They just don't identify it at the moment with the Conservative Party. Again, I'd still be quite wary of that as well. I think people have a sense of fairness. They don't like things that don't feel or sound fair, but again, that word feel. And I think there is a definitely economic competence. And this is where actually, I think 27, 28, the battle will really open up, is it's still the economy, stupid.
Yeah.
If people feel like they're better off, if the economy is growing, then a lot of other things happen and debates open up around that. If you haven't got that, you're still pretty much stuck in the trenches slugging it out.
Based on the usual stats for local elections, around about 35% of people show up, which is pretty poor. Arguably, that figure would be higher in elections for Scotland and for Wales. There's much more at stake there. Just a final point, Giles. What are your predictions then? How do you imagine Wales will look tomorrow? How will Scotland look?
Well, first and foremost, and again, I probably would say this, wouldn't I? But it's based on the Labour in for a shocking night.
Yep.
The Tories aren't going to have a great night at all. They've been predicting a shocking night. They don't want to have one like May. They didn't want a bad result in case Robert Jenrick launched a leadership attempt on Kemi Bennett. Well, that's not going to happen now, is it? So there's that. But then it's not going to be a good night for either of the two main parties. I've just been reading something that I've been sent, which we're publishing tomorrow. For the two main parties, basically, Labour has a Keir problem and Kemi has a Tory problem. That's essentially the thing. People like Kemi, but they're not sure about the party.
Yeah.
Lots of people are okay about Labour, but they really don't like Starmer. That's going to be the problem. Reform will probably have a very good night. They've predicted that. I just wonder whether they'll have quite as good as they boasted, but it's all baked in, I think.
Do you think Zach Polanski is going to cut through in any meaningful way?
Well, it's funny, isn't it? We keep asking about is Polanski, is Farage, Badenoch, Starmer. Of course, none of them are on the ballot. The fact of the matter is, I think the Greens will take some seats off Labour and some councils in London, definitely. But you mentioned the 35% of the vote. I wrote about this morning. Ian, do you know who your councillor is, your local ward councillor? I have to say, I'm not sure I do. That's part of the problem.
The only time no is the short answer. Once in a while, some local magazine will come round and I'll look at it and I'll look at my ward. This would be parish councillor, yeah? And I'll go, oh, yeah, that's right. Now, I vaguely recognise the name, but that's as near as it gets. Yeah, every time I bump into somebody where I live, they used to be a councillor, but aren't any longer.
And I think that's part of the problem with these
elections.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
They are important, and they are important. We're going to read loads into them. We're making predictions. We're going to do the analysis when the results come through. But the truth of the matter is, not very many people know what local government does, and a lot of what local government does is boring, mundane, maintaining things that are statutory to do. We're not that interested in it. So which is why we keep talking about, is Zach Polanski going to cut through? Is Nigel going to have the night of his life? None of them are on the ballot paper.
It's a good point.
I think it's a problem. It does go to your point about mandatory voting, but I'm just not sure that is the answer. The answer is to engage people more and make them realise that the things that bother them in their day-to-day lives, they're all politics, they're all political, and there are things you can do about them. It's just you got to get up and do it.
It's funny, this morning, just a very final point, I saw a fella, and I've only just correlated this, I'm sure I've got it wrong. I saw a fella cutting a grass verge, on one of those sit-down mowers, obviously from the council. Now, whether they put him out there because they knew there's elections around the corner, although there's not elections where he was, so it wouldn't be that. But what was interesting when it comes to people talking about fixing the potholes and making the flower beds look nice, I looked at this fella on the lawnmower in the way that not that long ago, relatively speaking, people looked at somebody with a plough with horses and went, oh, you don't see those very often these days. It looked remarkable to see a council worker cutting the flipping grass.
Yeah, I mean, but then part of the thing is that people don't sort of connect with, my street lamp went on. Well, that's your council, your local authority. It's your money, by the way. You're paying for that. Your bins get collected. And the weird thing is, and I'm sure that parliamentary politicians really don't get this deep down, even though they say they do, that potholes and bins that actually matter to people. They really do. And what they don't realize is why some of those services are so difficult to get right is because of the statutory demands made on local government to do things that most residents take no part in. They're not services for them.
Spot on. On that point, Giles, we finished, but lovely to see you again, and we'll speak very, very soon. Giles Dillnot with us. He is the editor of Conservative Home. Incredible journalism and stories at Conservative Home, so I urge you to get along there. And you want those balanced views of what different parties and those that represent them or vote for them think and feel. That's where you'll find it. Thank you to Giles. Over to you in a couple of moments, particularly that question. Should it be compulsory to vote? 0344 499 1000.
Neil Kinnock felt the Labour Party. He changed the Labour Party. He thought he might be the Prime Minister in 92. We didn't win. But he had that feeling for the Labour Party. That doesn't exist with Keir Starmer, I'm afraid. Look, I often say, Jeremy, the Labour Party is the nearest thing I've got to a religion. But if the Labour Party was the Church of England, Keir Starmer would be the chief executive of it.
Well, he's the God. It means he's your God right now.
Well, he's not the spiritual leader, is my point.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This one comes in from Ian, who says, Ian and Chloe, for me, it's of interest who will benefit from either position, making voting compulsory versus the option of voting. Of course, it should be optional. There is that sort of third way, isn't there, where you have none of the above. So you've engaged in the process. You are that unhappy with how things are run. I mean, if you ask most people at any point in a government, are the government any good? Most people, regardless of party, will go, not really. I think that probably happens, just almost a human instinctive response, I think. Ian is down in London. Ian, what have you got for us? Hi.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Afternoon.
On compulsory voting.
Yeah.
Now, I'm in favour of compulsory voting with caveats. And one of them was what you just mentioned, a nota abstention option.
Yeah.
Also, all campaign addresses in English, no postal or proxy voted. My old dad is 95 in a wheelchair. I should be wheeling him up to the poll station to vote. Votes for prisoners, yes. Anne Widdecombe and Enoch Powell said there's no political mileage for prison reform. So if they have a vote, there will be. And maybe we'll stop filling our prisons and understand why they're filling up.
So you would give prisoners the vote?
Absolutely, for practical reasons. I'm not a lovey liberal. It's a practical, constitutional reason. Votes for 16-year-olds, because they're not going to rush out at 16, but if they miss their vote just before their 18th birthday, researchers found you lose them forever.
Isn't there, aren't the arguments around 16-year-olds voting slightly different, though, in the sense that you could argue that in terms of voting, that would require, generally speaking, it's not a vanity or a beauty contest. You're not voting for which one you like the look of or which one kind of fires up that nice feeling in the pit of your belly. You're meant to be voting on fundamental issues. And at 16, you've yet to experience most of those fundamental issues.
I will have to correct you there, Ian.
Go on.
I think 16-year-olds are far wiser than we think.
Okay.
I was completely despairing in politics. I stood as an independent in the last general election, and I gave an address to a group of 16-year-olds outside my local school before 16-year-olds were allowed to vote, persuading them to engage. Right now, I also spoke to a teacher passing by. She says they shouldn't, and I found out why. Because all the children I spoke to would vote reform if they could.
Do you think, really? That's interesting, because typically that isn't represented across the country, where most would go more of a green flavour or even Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, I think that's just an internal bubble, and they just
it might be.
They want to get the right answer.
It might be. Of course, it's not yet been made compulsory, has it? Here.
No.
So we will watch this space. Listen, Ian, I've got to run because the clock is upon us and the news is about to kick in. Thank you, mate, for that. Great call. This in from Darren in Manchester regarding compulsory voting. How about having a 2.5% reduction in council tax or the like for placing your voting card recorded as proof? Yeah, I mean, we shouldn't have to incentivise it like that, but in the absence of, 2/3 of the population who are probably not going to show up to their local elections tomorrow, maybe you have to. I think the turnout will be far greater for Wales if you're voting for a government. Similarly in Scotland, I think slightly more. Perhaps for mayoral races, there might be slightly more, but that's not right across the land. London and Manchester, no votes there for mayors tomorrow, but elsewhere there is. 0344 499 1000. Let's get the news at 2.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is the Afternoon Empire. It is also the home of Common Sense. Tomorrow, of course, big elections across the country. Thousands of council seats in England, Wales and Scotland going for the big one, as it were, who's going to be running those two countries. And, of course, there's mayoral elections there as well. Turnout is expected to be low, however. That seems to be the case with local elections. There is an indifference. What is going on? How can we usurp this? And would making voting compulsory be the answer? Also this afternoon, ministers are allegedly planning a Trojan horse plot to replace Keir Starmer with Andy Burnham after those local elections. The plan involves a sympathetic North West MP standing down to pave the way, as it were. This could possibly happen next week. This would create a parliamentary seat for the Greater Manchester Mayor and stick him into Westminster, but not necessarily into number 10 straight away. There's more to this story. We'll chat to John Power from The Spectator in just a moment. And I love this. An investigation has found that civil servants are faking office attendance, with some failing to come into the office for years. Not weeks. It's not, where's John? It's not that. It's like, who's John? I never met the man. He's never been to work. What is going on at Civil Service HQ? We'll bring you the latest on that. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Trev says it's a wasted topic. Well, it's not a wasted topic. You might disagree with it. Says you can't make voting compulsory in a common law country. Well, that's not entirely true. Belgium is a civil law country. The UK is a common law country, but so is Australia, a common law country where it's also compulsory. So it can happen, and of course you can change systems. This one from Andy, who says the trouble with 16 to 18-year-olds voting is that they're still in the process of being brainwashed by the radical left in education. And even if you wanted to be more generous than Andy, you could say, well, they're still at school. I mean, there would be one reason that might not sit well with just basic logic of the experience of life that one might assume you kind of need at least a bit of in order to vote has yet to happen. Kath says, reasons not to vote Tory. Can't trust them ever again. 14 years of lies, too many Liberals, not enough real Tories. I agree and disagree with some of that. I think we've dined out for far too long on the 14 years of. I mean, you have to remember 5 of those years were in coalition. And for what happened after that, I think most of the time, it was really up until COVID, people, I think, got the hump with the Tories. It was in that sort of 2021, 22 era. But unfortunately for the Conservatives, as Kath correctly points out, it doesn't matter whether you were at the hump for them for a year. It's now just the go-to response. 14 years, they messed it up. But were they ever really Tories? I mean, that's also another example. If you listen to some Tories, they look at reform. Reform, of course, say, you know, we're essentially what the Tory party should be. I mean, they're not saying that out loud, but that's you extrapolate from reformism that these are disgruntled Tories and want to see Conservative politics done properly. But then you speak to some Tories who go, no, the Conservative Party was never, ever this or that. But we come back to the Great Divide, and we're in that place. Would it be better for our democracy if we had compulsory voting? Would that assist in any way? Let's talk to John Power, Assistant Content Editor at The Spectator, over another story here. This is about, of course, the Trojan horse strategy that we keep hearing about. After the local elections, ministers are ready, John, as we understand it, to parachute Andy Burnham onto that golden path to number 10. Is this a rumour or is it a bit more than that?
Oh, it's definitely got some, lots of thought that's gone into this. I mean, the main thing that's changed is that the thing that stopped Burnham last time, which is the NEC was going to, blocked him. That has now materially changed, and now we know that the NEC, Labour's executive committee, will actually let Burnham in. I think the key thing is not really whether or not these machinations are taking place. I'm sure that they are, and I'm sure that at this point, Burnham now will find a way in if he wants it, and if the MPs crucially decide that it's a good idea to have him replace Keir Starmer. The real question, I think, really is both for Burnham and for the people who want him to replace Starmer is what changes if Burnham becomes Prime Minister. Burnham is a slightly better communicator, that is true. But the reality is that he will face all the same problems Starmer has right now. The key problem being is that the economy is doing very badly, and that the Labour MPs and the backbenchers don't want to face up to the fact that there needs to be some form of retrenchment fiscally. Burnham will have to pass a budget. The bond markets will tell him that he's not allowed to do the spending at the level that his backbench MPs want to do. This will cause all the same problems that Starmer have faced. He'll try to do welfare reform, and it won't work. So, is it better to at least have a Prime Minister who has the mandate of having just won an election? Or do you have a situation like you had with Gordon Brown towards the end of the third New Labour government, where every single time he appears in an interview with a panel, he is told, you need to stand down, you need to call an election because we didn't vote you in.
There is a kind of wider theory as well on this, John, isn't there? And that is that, because obviously to be able to stand being the current mayor, if you drop out of being the mayor, that means there's got to be an election for a new mayor. That's quite expensive, aside from anything else. The NCC may put a stop to that. Keir Starmer previously did. The smart money suggests Keir Starmer won't, and he'll have a word in the ears of those on the committee and say, no, don't stop him, let it happen. Because there's apparently a deeper agreement going on, and that is that, Andy Burnham comes back, but he doesn't pounce for the big job for maybe a year down the line, giving Starmer another 12 months in Downing Street. What do you make of that?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, I think that once these local election results come in and we find out that, think about how many MPs have wives or husbands who are Labour councillors and how much of a psychological impact it will have on them losing so much of London and local elections. Is this kind of like phased out exit something that can actually plan? Are MPs so angry that they decide that they're going to go ahead with pulling the trigger without there being any kind of central coordination that Starmer might think he'll be able to pull off at this stage? So I think there's a question there, and you can also see that for the other sort of major rival or candidate that people are discussing to replace Starmer, which is Angela Rayner, how she wants to have clearance before October. I think that on all of these counts, from at least the challenger's perspective, giving time to someone or saying, yes, I'll give you a year to sort yourself out and have an orderly transition. I don't think events necessarily play out a year and ahead with the way that politics has been for the last 5 years. You can't plan it that well. Indeed.
And then, of course, just a final point. You mentioned Angela Rayner there. Obviously, the tax thing's got to be cleared up first, but I think that's probably easy. That's doable in the next couple of months. And this potential pact between Burnham and Rayner, a kind of Brown-Blair thing, has been suggested that, he goes first and she gives it the second go, which I find rather... I don't like using that word. I find it offensive, because who cares whether I find something offensive? But you take the point that in terms of the democratic process, the idea that this is a CV-building exercise for mates shouldn't be how our democracy works.
No, you're totally right. I mean, and that's exactly how, going back to Brown, is how people perceived it. People were not happy that he became Prime Minister through this process. And, there's also another element of, the person, sometimes there is a reason that you weren't able to win by getting the election. There's a reason that Burnham has been spending 10, 15, 20 years never quite making it to being Prime Minister. He might not have the qualities that are necessary for him to win an election. So when he comes in, he may well be found out. We know that Burnham does not have a sort of team that has anywhere near the sort of breadth and quality that Number 10 operation currently has. It's quite small, it's coarse. He's an untested quantity in that respect. True. And a lot of the kind of, he may be a very great Manchester mayor, and he might be very suited to that job in the same way that Gordon Brown was suited to being Chancellor. But for the Number 10 position, he may find out if he gets there, that he's not actually cut out for it.
Indeed. Very final point then. Wes Streeting, where is he now in all of this? He seems to have taken a bit of a back seat. Is that the Mandelson thing that's kind of got in the way of any campaign he might have been considering?
The main problem that Wes Streeting has, Mandelson is obviously a problem, but the main problem is his own constituency. He only clung on to Ilford by a matter of 100 votes here and there. I think MPs will be very, very reticent to put him in as Prime Minister, because the humiliation in 2029 of not only losing that seat, but also for the Prime Minister to lose a seat would be so severe.
Yeah.
So this has been it's a shame because he's a good communication. There's a lot of promise around Wes, and he's done a reasonably good job as Health Secretary. But that is the electoral reality in this constituency.
John, thank you for your time. John Power, he is the assistant content editor over there at The Spectator. Thank you to him. Over to you. Brian says Starmer has turned what should be local elections tomorrow into a referendum on him. Every party is touting national policies when tomorrow should be about local issues. I'll vote Reform or Tory in a general election, but will vote for a brilliant independent council candidate tomorrow. Sadly, he won't win. Yeah, you're absolutely bang on. I keep hearing this, that if you look at the sort of leafleting and people standing in the local high street campaigning, they're talking really about as if it's a general election. Let's talk to James in the New Forest on compulsory voting. James, could it work? Should it work? Will it change anything if it does?
Hi, Ian. It most certainly won't work. I was in Australia with my aunt and they had a general election, and she said it's better we're on our road trip going to the beach than her having to vote. And I think it was a $25 fine, which she said was well worth it.
Yeah.
Also, in this country, how would they collect the fines? We can't even collect the fines from the courts issued out at the moment. So it's just going to be more backlog of people not paying fines. It's just totally ridiculous.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the level, that'd be a whole other tier of bureaucracy, wouldn't it, that you'd have to, set up to fine people for not voting. And, can they be bothered to do that? Unless you made it a substantial fine, of course. Like we take your house off you if you don't vote.
Yeah, but people would just say, they can't afford to, or they couldn't get the local authorities wouldn't give them a taxi to go and vote. Yeah. I mean, it's just crazy.
Indeed. Crazy indeed. James, thank you very much. James in the New Forest. This from Anne, who says voting, there is another option, that's to spoil your ballot. Yeah, you can still argue you took part in the process. You could go down there and just, draw a smiley face across it or something else. Benson says if it's made mandatory, politicians should be prosecuted for breaking their manifesto promises, says Ben in Stockwell. Henry in Northwood, compulsory voting will never work. Too many people living here who are not even registered. If you don't vote, then you cannot complain. Interesting calls and comments on this. There's a bunch of stuff going on here. There's the overarching question, should it be compulsory to vote? This is against the backdrop of big elections. They're local elections, but they're big tomorrow for many different reasons and geographic considerations as well. And what's with the disengagement generally in politics? And also the unbridled engagement for some. When suddenly the Green Party are predicted to get 70-odd seats. Reform are predicted to win, in some polls, convincingly. I mean, Reform have been going for a little while now. The Greens have been going for a little while, but only prominent in, I'm tempted to say, half a year. How do they rise from zilch to 70 seats? 0344 499 1000, 2:15. This is Talk.
Neil Kinnock felt the Labour Party. He changed the Labour Party. He thought he might be the Prime Minister in 92. We didn't win. But he had that feeling for the Labour Party. That doesn't exist with Keir Starmer, I'm afraid. Look, I often say, Jeremy, the Labour Party is the nearest thing I've got to a religion. But if the Labour Party was the Church of England, Keir Starmer would be the chief executive of it.
Well, he's the God. It means he's your God right now.
Well, he's not the spiritual leader, is my point.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk 0344 499 1000. 17 minutes after 2 o'clock. Now, a Telegraph investigation has exposed a work-from-home scandal in the public sector, with civil servants allegedly faking office attendance, some for years. Whistleblowers have reported that staff are ignoring rules, requiring at least 3 days in the office each week. Let's speak to Amir Kotecha, who's the CEO of the Centre for Government Reform and former diplomat. Amir, good afternoon to you. It's an interesting one, this, isn't it? Apparently, some people just haven't showed up for years for work, and no one noticed. What is going on?
I know, Ian. Hey, good afternoon. Look, it's shocking, but not surprising. But, you know, the stats that the Telegraph have put out are extraordinary. I mean, at HMRC, over 4,000 staff have not shown up in the office for more than 6 months. That's a huge number of people. And I think it's important also, Ian, I mean, these are not people, my reading of the data, these are not people that have been hired to be on remote working contracts. These are people that are expected to be in the office, but just aren't showing up.
Yeah. There is a sort of, I know the civil service, you know, the swamp or whatever people call it, and I know sometimes it's unfairly maligned, and you will know this, Amir, you know, you speak to most former government ministers as an example, and most of them will say to you, you know, there are great civil servants there. Nadine Dorries is a good example. She says, you know, she could never have run a department without the brilliance of the civil servant aspect of the job, which supported, guided her through the entire thing. So we're not saying every civil servant, whether you're working in the job centre or whether you're working in central government, whatever your job is a wrong un or lazy. But and so yes, we could stereotype an entire group of many tens of thousands of people here. We simultaneously know, however, Amir, that you almost have to commit second-degree murder to lose a job in the civil service. And that seems to be kind of key, I think, to what's going on here. People know they can't be fired.
Yeah, exactly that. And you know, it's totally unfair on the civil servants that are coming in, who aren't getting paid any extra. So they're expected to spend on commuting costs and, you know, going to Pret for lunch and all the rest of it when their colleagues are sat at home. So, no, as you say, and you don't need to slag off every single civil servant to be really, really angry about this. And the problem, as so often, is the system. The system just doesn't get tough on people.
Yes.
You know, there's this culture that actually, you know, you've got to be empathetic, you've got to be kind. If people aren't coming in, I'm sure it's for a good reason. And it's nonsense, frankly. You know, people want to work from home because they can put their washing out in between meetings and empty the dishwasher and all those other things that you can do at home. So no, it's really shocking. And one thing I would say, Ian, lots of people don't realise this, but civil servants working in London, out of London offices, are paid several £1,000s extra each year. So in the Foreign Office, it was about £5,000. It's called the London Location Allowance. And it's specifically to compensate you for the costs of commuting and working in London. So if they're not coming in, there's quite an easy, simple solution, which is they should lose that £5,000.
Yes, you'd have thought so. I did, and I've mentioned this before. You know, there is, it seems, this business about, you know, what you have to do to lose your job. The civil service, and my sort of experience of this is working for the BBC for about half an hour, which, you know, in theory is the civil service, as in, you know, everybody's paid by the government, therefore by the taxpayer. There was definitely a culture of when nobody had a target. That was one of the problems. It didn't really matter whether you did good or bad. Nobody was ever going to tell you did bad, and that was the problem. And there was a lot of, you know, the overarching concern about well-being over the job. And I always found that not just a bit weird, I found it tragic at best and almost criminal at worst.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Ian. And this is what's important, because people have different views on working from home in the private sector, right? And some people are for it and think that, there's a place for it in the modern world. But in the private sector, there's the profit motive. And if the productivity of the company goes down because people are working from home, very quickly the company will go bust, right? So there's a natural corrective in the private sector to work from home abuses, right? In the public sector, that just doesn't exist because, of course, there's none of those same market forces. And so I think this is the problem. In HMRC and across the public sector, productivity has flatlined in recent years. But of course, they just trundle on because it's the civil service and no one, really gets tough. So I think, we have to, even if you think that work from home has a place in the private sector, I just don't think you can say it works in the same way in the civil service, because people abuse it, and it is a minority, but it seems to be quite a significant minority according to the stats that the Telegraph have put out.
Indeed. Amir, great to have you on with us. Nice to speak again. Amir Kotecha, he is the CEO of the Centre for Government Reform and former diplomat. Thank you to him. And I have mentioned, the BBC is my only experience of working for what you'd call a public body. I know it's not strictly seen as the civil service in the kind of administrative kind of sense, but there were many examples. I remember people making what you'd call, not necessarily the gravest of errors, but general errors that would have required a boss to take you to one side and say, look, that was unacceptable. You can't do that. You royally messed it up and don't do it again. And I'm never going to give you this warning a second time. Those words would never, ever be said in the civil service. They would never be said at the BBC. Most of the managers that are in charge, who would be, or in any other world, would be charged with dispensing a rollicking if they had to, have gone on so many training courses of how not to dispense a rollicking and mental health and well-being. And I remember an occasion when that happened and saying to the person, God dear, what did he say? Did you get a right old pasting on this? And they said, no, why would I? So why would you? You went to the meeting because you'd done X, Y, Z. And so that's doubly bad, right? Not only did they not get a rollicking, it never even occurred to them they were going to get one. So they went completely happy to a meeting. So you live in this culture where you're never going to kind of lose your job. So you've got people at the HMRC or wherever who just don't go to work. They just don't go. Nobody says anything because the line managers, it's a bit of a faff. It's only Alf. He's worked for us for years. He's fine. Yeah, but he's in B&Q, mate. He's meant to be doing the spreadsheets. We all need a lawnmower. Alf needs it for his mental health. It was that sort of weird approach where the system becomes kind of like a surrogate parent. There are more questions about your well-being than they are about your work. In the workplace. 0344 499 1000. We're talking compulsory voting as well. Big elections tomorrow, of course. Would compulsory voting change either people's decisions on who they vote for? Would it work in getting more people to the ballot box? And is it a good thing to do in a free democracy? Brian is down in London. Brian, what have you got for us? Afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Hiya.
Hello, mate. I'll just like to say I do agree with compulsory voting. But it's been mentioned before, you mentioned it as well, is with the proviso that at the bottom there you have none of the above. And what happens is, if none of the above wins, the whole political parties and everyone on that ballot form has to pick another person and they come back and we try again. And I think that way, eventually, the politicians might understand that we control politics, not them. Yeah. And now looking now, at the moment, if we the last general election, and none of the above won. None of the above got 40%, and the Labour Party, with their massive majority, they only got, I believe, 20.4%, or was it 23.4%?
Yeah.
So, so I would like to see that. Now, to get people to vote, you haven't got to punish them, But if it's a general election, you could knock 1% off of someone's income tax.
What about though, Brian? I mean, as I mentioned a second ago, the overriding response to this conversation we're having is people go, "Hang on a sec, mate, we're a democracy. Why should you have to vote?"
Well, I think it's so important, really, isn't it? Because what's happened is everyone's decided, oh, I can't be bothered. They're all the same. And look at the shambles we've got running the country now. Now, if all that 40% had to go down and make a decision on the future of the country and our lives, we might be in a better state. You know what I mean? You know, it is important because it affects us all. And what does make me laugh is there's probably moaners saying, "Oh, the state of the country."
Yeah.
You say to them, "Who did you vote for?" "Oh, I couldn't be bothered. I was watching loose women. You know, who cares?" You know, so
very good loose women. You know. Not in the McGiffin era was the game changer, but it's changed since then. Listen, great call, Brian. Thank you very much indeed for that. Bella says, didn't you once mention somebody in Parliament that was caught looking at pornography who didn't lose their job? I did mention this before when a guy, it was a friend of mine who worked in the department and they could never find Fat Ron. Where's Fat Ron? They didn't know where he was, and they discovered him in a kind of annex room because there's so many little rooms in Parliament, and they discovered him in a room watching porn on a computer, playing the one-armed bandit. Just all I can say, all right? I can't think of any other term that's acceptable. So Big Ron was then taken to the department for trouser abuse or whatever it is, and he said, "Oh, you know, I've got loads going on," and they went, "All right, sorry, Ron. You know, don't worry, mate. We'll look after you." 2 more times Ron was caught on the shuffle down in the old corridors of Westminster. 2 more times, still didn't lose his job. In any other world, you'd have Fat Ron out of that place with his pants still round his ankles and his little Charlies sweeping the path like sandbags. I mean, you wouldn't care, would you? Filthy git. But he was told, of course, no, he's got mental health issues. No, he has a propensity to do stuff he shouldn't do in the workplace. Andy is in Chesterfield. Andy, what do you got for us? Good afternoon.
Afternoon, Ian. Yeah, basically, I was interested in this thing about the civil servants not turning up for work. I don't think it's just civil service. I run a dog walking company.
Oh, yeah.
And in the last year or so, I would say that our work, which is basically walking people's dogs generally while they're at work, I would say our work has halved. And it's not because people have moved away or because people have said goodbye to us. It's because people who sort of had 4 walks a week or 5 walks a week and now having 1 and stuff like that. And
because they're at home.
They're saying, "Oh, well, we're back working from home again," and they're using this thing about the golf and the stay-at-home news and that. They're using that as a bit of an excuse now as well to go, "Oh, we want to work from home again." But people working from home are not working, and I think the minimum wage should be abolished for people who work from home.
It is interesting, isn't it? Depending on who you listen to, apparently what happened, I don't know if this is across the board, Andy, but when the whole COVID thing struck and they started, there were some places doing it before, but it became a big thing working from home because people had no choice. Productivity apparently went up for about 6 months and then it went down. So for 6 months, people thought, oh, this is a good way to do it. I'll throw all my efforts into it. And then they realised you could still cram in a Pilates class, even though you're meant to be working from home. You could still do a long lunch at the pub, even though you used to. And more realised there were ways to kind of swing the lead or play the system so they could still get their work done and carry on having, you know, quite I would say a fairly generous lifestyle.
Exactly, yeah.
So it started out looking positive, but didn't last very long.
It didn't, no, but it's never ended though. People are still working from home now. Why is it when companies are paying thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds in rent and rates for office blocks, why is it that there's nobody in charge of those companies that's saying to their staff, "Oi, you, get back in this office 9 till 5, nose in front of that computer and earn your money"?
You might think that would be the most obvious thing to do, but no, again, nobody wants to say that because they'd probably get in trouble themselves for speaking to a member of staff in that way, because that would be bad for their mental health.
Well, is there any wonder why this country is in the absolute state it's in then?
Yeah, it's a great point. Andy, thank you, mate, for that. Great call. Andy in Chesterfield, 0344 499 1000. We're going to talk about racism in nursery schools in just a second. Oh, it's off the scale. In fact, nursery staff have been told that in cases where they think it's so bad, to call 999 to report little Timmy, the 3-year-old, who did something that apparently was so racist it required the emergency services to come out. I'm not making this up. I'll give you the full story in just a couple of moments. It's 2:30. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This from Tanya in London, who says, Ian, disengagement with politics is due to all the lies. A party publishes their manifesto. When they get into power, the said manifesto is scrunched up and thrown in the bin. Yeah, I'd be interested to know what percentage of manifesto pledges are achieved. I think I'm right in saying, and this is going to sound unbelievable, but it does feed into my belief that the person that should get the award for politician of the last 50 years, you can throw in Thatchers and Blairs and all that stuff, I get that, is actually Nick Clegg. Now, before you pick yourself up off the floor from discombobulating in hysterics, here's my thinking. So Nick Clegg, the Lib Dems in 2010, I think they had 57 or 59 MPs, and they made their way into government as part of a coalition. So 57 MPs, nothing at all really in the grander scale of what you need to run a country. They managed to get something like 75% of their manifesto into policy from the starting point of having 57 MPs and the junior partner of a coalition. Now, you could say, well, they were talking nonsense, tripe, what they were advocating was rubbish. Maybe. Still got 75%. That'd be, if that was some kind of, Westminster's Got Talent, Clegg would be getting the golden buzzer, wouldn't he, on that one? Strange, right? So yes, it would be interesting to see how much of a percentage get into policy or law, and how much, just as Tanya says, just gently gets slid into the nearest bin. And what about this story? Talk about reaching for the bin. Labour-backed taxpayer-funded guidance is advising nurseries to report children for racist incidents, including contacting the police if the incident could be a hate crime. This is ridiculous, particularly when you think of the kind of stuff kids think. Have a listen.
About in school. Martin Luther King Jr.
Martin Luther King Jr. What'd he do?
He died for a sin.
No, that was Jesus. But, you know, it's a 4-year-old kid. It's the kind of weird stuff. Kids say strange stuff all the time. They do strange stuff, rarely knowing the meaning or the actuality. Let's speak with Joanna Williams, author of How Woke Won, and, of course, writer at The Spectator. I mean, Joanna, look, every time we talk about something like this, I always think, hang on, we've got this wrong, and there must be more to this story. You take a step back, you read it again, and you go, nope, that is the story. Quite literally, nurseries are being told to report kids for racism. What the hell has happened here? Oh, we can't hear you, Joanna. Is that a mute button thing? We'll get Joanna back. Faith's having a chat off air. Joanna, hopefully, is there, and we can connect and communicate.
Hi.
Yeah, we can hear you now, Joanna. Thank goodness.
Hello, sorry about that.
Not at all. What's going on here? What's happening in our nurseries?
Well, I think it's absolutely insane, this proposal. And I think the fact is that there's nothing going on in our nurseries whatsoever. Our children are exactly the same as they always were. And the idea that babies and toddlers are racist is frankly for the birds. As you pointed out, children might say silly things perfectly innocently, but the idea that children have suddenly become racist and there's this epidemic of racism that needs the police and nursery workers to stamp it out is madness.
I mean, it really is madness, isn't it? And in some cases, being told to call 999. I mean, you can't get a 999 call responded to if your house gets torched or you get burgled. So the idea that we should waste precious time of the emergency services dialing 999 for what are clearly, by any measure, going to be non-incidents.
I mean, I'd love to laugh about this. I wish it was a comedy sketch, because you would just, this is all it's worth is laughing at. I'd like to think if I was a police officer and I was on the receiving end of a 999 call saying that a 2-year-old had said a racist word, I would tell that nursery worker where to go in no uncertain terms. You know, what worries me is partly this idea that you think our nursery workers and our police officers would have far better things to do with their time than getting involved in the petty squabbles of toddlers. But what worries me is that this might stay with children all their lives, these accusations of racism, that when they're taken seriously, it could actually sow disharmony in the nursery. It makes very young children, even very, very young children, be wary and suspicious of each other when they should just be all playing together happily.
Well, I was going to mention that. We're going to come on to DEI in just a second. So I know you've written a piece about this, which I was delighted to read, I must say. But I always sense that these kind of initiatives, as far as I can tell, Joanna, end up causing the very problem they're purporting to solve. And that's, I think, the big issue here, isn't it? If you tell a load of kids, you tell anyone, frankly, oh, watch out for behaviour, make sure you report this if you see it, and then suddenly you've criminalised a load of kids who've done nothing wrong, but they've just been reported because another kid is going, oh, look, he looked at that kid in a weird way. So that could be racism, miss, or that could be homophobia, or whatever it happens to be. It could be... You end up creating a culture. If you set up a reporting culture in that way, you will get people respond to it.
Absolutely. And I think it's not only the reporting culture, but it's the actual lessons that the nursery workers are supposed to be taking into the preschool setting. So one of the things in this Welsh guidance, it says nursery workers should be having conversations with children about melanin and the complexity and beauty of skin colour. And what that does is racialises children. It tells them that they should be seeing each other in terms of their skin colour. I mean, maybe I'm getting old now, but I was always brought up to think that to be anti-racist was to be colourblind, to not judge people by the colour of their skin, but to look at somebody's character, to look at somebody's what somebody was like as a person, and that if you saw somebody in relation to their skin colour, then that was actually making racial judgments. Now it seems that we're actually teaching children to do exactly
to make
that.
racial judgments. And look, most of this, of course, should be stuff that is dealt up within the home. Kids should be brought up in a way that is, you know, respectful and regardless of colour and gender and all that business, all the usual stuff. And that, certainly with this particular cohort of under fives, tends to work really well. Even if a kid says something that is a bit off, it's invariably an accidental phrase they've used. It's not that they're not wheeling out Bernard Manning material in the nursery. They've used a phrase almost inadvertently or accidentally that could be construed in a certain way, and then of course if you have ultra vigilant nursery workers who are told to, oh, the kid keeps wanting to sing Bar Bar Black Sheep, they ask every day, there must be a reason for that, let's put them on the list. So you sort of create this culture. Kids will say weird stuff, sometimes and mostly it's funny, sometimes it will be off, but usually with absolutely zero intent to offend, because kids can be just quite literal sometimes when they're talking about stuff. I mean, it's an absolute mess. And what I find interesting about all of these stories, Joe, and I always come back to this is something that somebody walked into work one day, presumably, and came up with a suggestion. Someone sat round a table with other human beings and said, I've got a good idea. And the rest of them agreed with it.
I mean, it totally beggars belief. You're absolutely right, though, in what you say, that children always do and always will say stupid things, and they repeat odd things that they hear adults saying. But the idea that nursery workers, parents, other adults that children come into contact with are not capable of taking children to one side and just quietly, quickly saying, don't say that. That's not a very good word to say. That wasn't very nice. You know, don't say that again. I mean, this is how adults and children have related to each other for generations, and people have managed to get along just fine by doing that. So to do what you've just described, to go and sit in front of a room full of other adults and say, do you know what, we should really encourage nursery workers to dial 999 and report a hate crime if they hear a toddler say something bad, suggests a real lack of faith in people. I mean, really, it suggests contempt for those nursery workers. It says that they're not capable of having that quiet word, as people have been able to do for generations. And it suggests for contempt for children as well. It suggests children are bad and nursery workers are incapable. So we need to pay these bureaucrats probably tens of thousands of pounds a year to sit in offices coming up with insane policies like this, which, as we've said, actually makes an okay situation many, many times worse.
Indeed. Well, there's 1.3 million quid being put into this guidance, so it's a lot of money. Taxpayers are responsible for it. Of course, childcare workers must audit books, dolls, posters and snacks, for goodness sake, to ensure their anti-racist stance is visibly reflected throughout their settings. I mean, where do you stop with that? I mean, this is just we'll be having book burnings soon. You know, this is just absolutely mad. And I come back to what I said, Joanna, at the beginning. It reminds me of America. I heard somebody recently say, oh, the UK is so behind America in this stuff. And in fact, no, we're slightly ahead of America, because thankfully we are in some respects starting to ditch this nonsense, but it's not yet perfect. All the while we have that kind of stuff where you go into, you know, these organisations that go into big companies and say, oh, we can give, I can't remember what the name of the training is, you know, sort of racial bias training, that kind of unconscious bias. We'll give you training. You've got 500 staff for £3,000 per staff member. We'll make them not racist. And you think, well, they're not racist to start with, but, you know, big corporations, they jump at that. That's a brilliant idea, because we can then preen our virtuous whiskers to the world and say, yeah, we've got a clean sheet for something that doesn't actually exist. And it brings us to this story of what you've called, I know in the piece that you've written today, the slow death of diversity, equity and inclusion, DEI. Are we seeing the beginning of the end of that rather destructive industry?
Well, let's hope so. I mean, the end can't come soon enough, as far as I'm concerned. These initiatives have been absolutely poisonous in the workplace, have led to all kinds of discrimination, created so many problems, and have been so divisive, setting workers against workers, detracted from the main aims that companies should be doing, you know, whether that's making ice cream or nuclear power. You know, the more time that you spend on diversity, equity and inclusion schemes is less time for doing the job that you're actually paid to be doing. Huge waste of time and money to criminalise people's thoughts, to criminalise people's intentions. And again, I'd go back to what I was saying about nurseries. The idea that workers cannot get along with each other, cannot resolve differences between themselves, that everybody's got this. Racism, I think, has become to be seen almost like a form of original sin. That there's this kind of stain on all our characters. And even if we don't think we have it, it's there in our unconscious bias. And we need these experts to come in and expose our inner sin,
yes,
and correct our thinking.
I mean, it's extraordinary. And of course, you know, white privilege is kind of one of the things that just gets thrown in there like it's sort of a matter of fact, and there's no nuance or debate to be had on this one. And the other term, microaggressions, and we've seen stories of people claiming racism in the workplace because somebody rolled their eyes at them. But of course, if you create a culture where, you know, everybody in a clandestine way underneath it all has racist proclivities somewhere, particularly if you're white, and, you know, that should be noted, and if you see it, report it. So if you're engaged in a company where that culture prevails and you're taught in various training courses that this is the reality, the new reality. It's completely invented, but if you say it often enough, it sounds like fact. And then somebody rolls their eyes at you, you will put that down as a microaggression, and therefore it's arguably tainted in racism. I mean, this is just cobblers.
Absolutely, and I think that's a very good example of how these schemes are so divisive. It stops people just sorting things out amongst themselves, and spontaneous friendships and working relationships from forming. And it's even worse than that, because not only is eye rolling considered to be a microaggression, but not making eye contact is also considered to be a microaggression.
Yes, you don't know what to do with your eyes.
So you can't win, you know, look at someone in the wrong way, don't look at someone at all. Both of them will be considered to be a form of racism and a microaggression. But the fact is, no one can live or work like that. You know, as soon as you start becoming conscious of your eye movements, you can't function. You know, your interactions with other people become so stilted. Again, it's a good example of how you create problems where there are none to begin with.
It's completely bizarre. Listen, Joanna, thank you for being with us, and some encouraging thoughts there at the end from Joanna Williams, that we might be seeing the slow death of diversity, equity and inclusion. Whether this is a sort of Trump thing. You don't have to support Trump, by the way, to see the nonsense in all of this. It's become a multi-billion-pound industry. Now we're teaching kids about it. You look at somebody the wrong way or the right way. Finn, our producer, he's got like weird eyes, so they don't quite look in the same direction. So you never know with him whether you're looking, you know, he's what you call cross-eyed. And to make it worse, he's white as well, which is the worst kind of cross-eyed person, a white one. Yeah. So old whitey cross-eyes out there, we don't know where the hell he's looking half the time. Is he insulting us? Is he mocking us? We don't know. It is a nonsense, and it rather sort of articulates brilliantly the nursery story. Ring 999 if you think this 4-year-old is a mad racist. Seriously? 03. Even if you wanted to report something, would you be ringing 999? The kids aren't going to leg it, are they, if they think they've been rumbled as some kind of Eugene Terre Blanche of the local nursery? 0344 499 1000. We've got a brand new Voice of Doom on the way. Stand by for that. And, of course, more of you. Of course, some great calls coming in on compulsory voting and this as well, DEI and more. Lines are open 10 to 3. This is Talk.
Kinnock felt the Labour Party. He changed the Labour Party. He thought he might be the Prime Minister in 92. We didn't win. But he had that feeling for the Labour Party. That doesn't exist with Keir Starmer, I'm afraid. Look, I often say, Jeremy, the Labour Party is the nearest thing I've got to a religion. But if the Labour Party was the Church of England, Keir Starmer would be the chief executive of it.
Well, he's the God. It means he's your God right now.
Well, he's not the spiritual leader, is my point.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This in from Honey in Swansea. I'm wondering about the nursery story. Could it be an attempt to rot out parents rather than the little ones? For example, a 3-year-old says a racist term. Is it to be assumed that it comes from hearing the family express the racist term, then come after them? I think that's probably part of it, but it would be rare. In most cases, you would reasonably extrapolate. I mean, depending on what it was. I mean, it was something massively... if a 3-year-old gave a speech on, why this group is more superior to that group based on race, then you might stop and go, that's a bit weird. Maybe have a chat with mum and dad. I think you might do that before you called the cops, wouldn't you? We'll talk to Helen in just 1 second. We've got a brand new voice of doom. This is the mystery voice. It's a politician or somebody massively associated with politics. They could be left-wing, they could be right-wing, young, old, dead or alive. We have one simple question. Can you identify whose voice is this?
The voice of a Briton.
Now, by the way, I don't actually know the answer to this. I thought I did, and I got it wrong in the office, and they wouldn't tell me who it was. Let's hear it again.
The voice of a Briton.
Nope. And again.
The voice of a Briton.
If you think you know, only one way to get in touch, not on X, it's 87222, 87222. If we get a correct answer, then in the next hour we shall tell you who it is. If we don't, it rolls over to tomorrow. Here it is again.
The voice of a Briton.
87222. Helen is in Kings Lynn. Helen, what have you got for us? Afternoon.
Hi, and afternoon. I was just listening. My son's now 20. This kind of racism in early years has been around for quite a while. Now, a very, very quick backstory. My son was born profoundly blind. He has no light perception. So he is not visually able to judge people in terms of how they look in any way, shape or form.
Sure.
He was 4, he was in reception, and he was a young 4, he was an August baby, and he had been playing with a group of friends, and there was an Indian pupil. Now, this was a rural village in Lincolnshire, an Indian pupil 15, 16 years ago, and he overheard a couple of the other children referring to this Indian pupil via the P word, okay?
Okay. So this was children using that word?
He heard a couple of other children sitting in a small, play group using this word. So, and he heard the name of the pupil. So the next time he was talking to this pupil, he said, "Hello, P." Okay.
And used the word he'd heard.
He'd used the word he'd heard. Now, we were called in. He was 4 years old. He had been taken out of that closed group setting and told to sit outside the headmistress's office until we arrived. When we arrived, the situation was explained, And I said to them, well, he's obviously heard this from other children because he cannot make that decision himself.
Yep.
He cannot see. So we were told at the time he was going to be put on a racism alert register for 1 year. For 1 year.
How old was he? 4, did you say?
4. Okay. So he was put on a racism alert register for 1 year. Now, my point is this, Ian. The following year, we moved out of county and we changed schools. Now, the week he was leaving, most of us all know we get the weekly newsletter or the monthly newsletter from the schools. The school actually said at the end of the letter, and we would like to say goodbye to our blind pupil. He didn't have his name acknowledged. He was acknowledged by his disability.
Seriously? We'd like to say goodbye to our blind pupil?
Absolutely, 100%. And he brought home this letter in the book bag. Obviously, he couldn't read it.
Yeah.
I pulled it out. I read through the newsletter, thinking the last one, blah, blah. Last paragraph, we would like to say goodbye to our blind pupil. I immediately got on the phone to the school office. And I said, last year, he was put on the racism register for using the P word because he'd overheard other children using it. And you now refer to his goodbye as the blind pupil.
Did they apologise?
They did apologise. They said, well, we can reissue the newsletter. And I said, it's pretty pointless.
Yeah, the damage is kind of done, isn't it? There's no logic. And when you get into... It's interesting how disability was relegated to something that wasn't seen as quite as serious as a kid misusing a horrific, horrible slur, but through completely understandable reasoning based exactly on the fact that he was unable to visually see somebody. I mean, it's upside down. Helen, I've got to move. And he was 4 at the time. He was 4 at the time. Thank you to Helen in Kings Lynn. We've got, on a lighter note, the voice of doom. Who is this?
The voice of a Britain.
87222, if you think you know.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Afternoon and welcome back to the Home of Common Sense. Less than 24 hours away from some fairly significant elections. Ordinary local elections don't mean that much, but these are big. 5,000 plus seats in England, and then of course the entirety of Scotland, the entirety of Wales, deciding on who runs those administrations, and there's mayoral seats thrown into the mix as well. It is big. You know, the sad bit, turnout will probably be quite low. In many local elections, regularly under 35%. This is woeful in a democracy. What's behind it and how do we address it? Would compulsory voting work? They do it in Belgium, they do it in Australia. I think there's a couple of other countries where they give it a go. Is that the line we need to go down? Make it illegal or make it legal to vote and illegal if you don't. Also this afternoon, ministers are allegedly planning a Trojan horse plot to replace Keir Starmer with Andy Burnham. This would come after the local elections. The plan involves a sympathetic North West Labour MP stepping down, possibly as early as next week, to create a parliamentary seat for the Greater Manchester mayor. There's much more to it that would have to happen, of course, but is that likely to be the case? And how will it pan out for Keir Starmer's Labour Party tomorrow? And as we were discussing, the investigation that found that civil servants are faking office attendance, with some failing to come into work for years. I just don't know how you would manage that. When was the last time you saw Alf? Oh, I'm going to go 1998. We haven't seen him since. Does he still work? Oh, yeah. Still on the payroll, just doesn't come to work. Interesting times. Everything you need to know, we'll bring you all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. We've been talking in a roundabout kind of way about education in nursery settings and what kids are capable of knowing or understanding. This was largely regarding inappropriate language from youngsters. So, OK. Kids are always on a learning curve. But what about this? A new poll has highlighted a major gap in public understanding of military service, especially among Gen Z. 2/3 of Gen Z adults are unaware that VE Day commemorates the end of World War II. Announced, of course, by Winston Churchill himself.
Hostilities will end officially at 1 minute after midnight tonight, Tuesday, the 8th of May.
Well, there it is. Just 2 days away from the 8th of May, of course. Let's speak with James Holland, historian and author. James, good afternoon to you.
Hello, how are you?
All right, nice to have you with us. I think it's kind of interesting when you speak to sometimes people of different generations, but often in different parts of the country, you know, what you did and didn't learn in history. I've had that conversation so many times over the years with mates in pubs. We did a lot about Henry VIII, and that seemed to be, in my head, looking back, I fear that that's all we did for 2 years was Henry VIII and his wives and what happened, and obviously the switching of religions and all of that. I was quite big on that stuff for a while. I could have been you at one point, James, that's how big I was, but only in that very parochial area of Henry VIII. We didn't do anything on the Holocaust or any of those kind of sort of more contemporary history, which, in fact, we got most of that knowledge from our drama teacher extraordinary, who happened to be Jewish and told us quite a lot about it. So that was enlightening, and thank goodness she was there. So it does differ wildly, but there does seem to be, just to come back to this story, an overarching problem, regardless of where you live, with Gen Z, is in not knowing, is it fair to say not knowing the basics, or are we in danger of maligning younger people here?
I don't know. I mean, as long as I've been a professional historian, I've been rung up from time to time with sort of, outraged polls by the Daily Mail saying it's a disgrace that young people don't know the difference between 1066 and 1940 and all this sort of stuff. Yeah. I mean, I've got to say, when I was a teenager, I didn't know anything either. I never studied any 20th century history at all when I was at school. I was the last year of O-levels, not for O-levels, not for A-levels, not in my degree. And I think, you know, when you're a teenager, your horizons are literally what's in front of your nose, aren't they?
Sure.
And you're interested in sport and social occasions and your mates and all that kind of stuff. And your horizons are incredibly narrow. I mean, I think one thing I would say is that history is the one academic subject we study at school where you can give it up at 14 or 16 or 18 or whenever, and then come back to it later on in life. It becomes a much more sort of vocational subject. I mean, very, very few people sort of retake up chemistry at 29, do they? But the amount of people that say to me,
definitely not physics.
Oh, I always hated history at school. It was really boring, but I'm really into it. I'm obsessed with Second World War. And I think that's kind of fine. And I think that's a feature of life that the older you get, the more you want to kind of see how you fit into the world. But when you're a teenager, you don't know anything, do you?
You really don't. So you don't think there's any need to panic that, you know, somebody went around with a clipboard and said to a bunch of kids, you know, a bunch of younger people, you know, VE Day, what does it mean? And they went, oh, I don't really know. I have no idea, frankly. That's not a point of crisis for our future.
I don't think so. I mean, I think there is a very good case for studying the Second World War at school, because the tentacles of the Second World War continue to be felt even to this day. But they don't. I mean, I think at primary school, most people do a tiny little bit on kind of, you know, being an evacuee or the Blitz or something. Most people up to GCSE do the Holocaust and a bit of kind of rise of Nazis and that kind of stuff. But there's very, very few schools where you actually study any feature about the Second World War at all, which, you know, obviously as a Second World War historian, I find quite astonishing, really, because it's so relevant. But they don't. So how can you expect Gen Z people to kind of really know much about it?
Yeah, indeed. And I think you brought up a bigger point there in many respects, and that is that I would say history is probably of all the subjects that you do revisit as an adult, arguably history would be number one, wouldn't it? I mean, you don't tend to suddenly whip out the old book of algebraic equations when you're 32. I don't know anyone that did that. But I do have a mate who's, you know, said to me quite recently, he said, I'm really into reading about World War II. He said, I just kind of stumbled on it.
He sounds like a fine fellow.
He's a bit weird, is Dan, I have to say you that much. And he does like a wicked cider. But he has absolutely engaged in that area, and it's fascinating. It gripped him, and he just, you know, he wanted to know more with each book he read. And how good is that?
Well, it's absolutely fantastic. And at least half the population must have some relative who was involved in the Second World War in some capacity. And people want to know about their past, and they want to know how their family fits in. And they do want to understand what it was like being an ordinary person caught up in these extraordinary events of World War II. But I'll tell you something. I mean, my brother Tom is one of the co-hosts of the Rest is History podcast, and I co-host a specifically Second World War podcast with the comedian and historian Al Murray. And I think the average age of listeners for ours is 37, and I think it's 34 for the Rest is History. And I would say that's broadly pretty encouraging, really, because if that's an average, that means there's a hell of a lot of younger people listening to it as well. And I think it's just basically as you get into your late teens and in your early 20s, I think you do start to become a little bit more interested in this stuff. And as you say, it's a one subject that one can study at school that you can come back. My own view is that it should be compulsory up to GCSE, and they need to stop this kind of ink spotting and try and give people through their school years a kind of broad brush history of this country from, you know, before 1066 right through to pretty much now.
Yeah.
And then you don't have these little ink spots of history where you're doing kind of suffragettes, Russian Revolution, civil rights in America in the 1960s, none of which are kind of particularly connected. You get a broad brush of the overview of the history of this country, and then everyone understands how they fit in. And it's everyone's history, because if you're a citizen of this country, then the past is a part of your own story as well, even if you weren't particularly born here or you're any kind of first or second generation or whatever.
For me, are you familiar with a historian called Lucy Moore?
Of course, yeah, very much. She's actually a neighbour and a great friend of mine.
Oh, well, there you go. That's very bizarre that I should mention that. You know her really well. And she wrote a book called The Thieves' Opera some years ago, which I read and tucked into. And I remember interviewing her at the time. There was so much of that I didn't even realise. You know, anyone that can mention Gin House anywhere in a book, I'm there. Not because I like gin, but I think that whole kind of that area of London and the you know, all that went on and everything that people like Dickens had written about and goodness knows who else. You know, it's just genuinely fascinating to me. So my point is we all pick our bit, don't they? We think, you know, Victorian London. When I once walked down a street where, and it was just to make it even more poignant, I had to deliver something, and it was late at night, and it was foggy, and it was one of those back streets of London where, even though it was in central London, it was a back street, and they, you know, sometimes they use the old street, the sort of Victorian street lamps, just to keep up the kind of
the old-fashioned vibe.
The old-fashioned vibe. And I looked up and there was a blue plaque, and I can't think of the guy's name, but anyway, it was the Elephant Man's surgeon that lived at this house. And the fog, the lamp, I was back there at that point. I just thought this was... I actually got a little bit scared, to be honest, but that area of London, that time, that era, not in fact, across the country, I find genuinely fascinating. What about yourself, James? I know you've got your obvious pet areas that you really like to tuck into, you devour, and you speak about and write and broadcast about with real passion. What are those other areas that you feel are slightly still uncharted that you'd like to tuck into?
Well, I like all history, to be honest. I mean, I've recently been up in Orkney, and as well as looking at the wartime naval base, I made sure I had a look at the Ring of Brodgar and Skara Bray and all the rest of it, and it was absolutely fantastic, all that Neolithic stuff. I absolutely loved it. So I like all history. I've got a particular penchant for Restoration England and Charles II and that era. But I like all history, and to be honest, I think history is very helpful for people to try and make sense of the crazy things that are going on at the moment, because history doesn't repeat itself, but patterns of human behaviour most certainly do.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's why Shakespeare still speaks to us, for example, because we still love and hate and feel resentment and envy and happiness and charity and all those things, all those good things and bad things. That makes up the human mind. Sure. And you can look back at the ebbs and flows of history and economic upturns and economic downturns, and people behaving pretty much the same way. Yeah. And, you know, if you look back to sort of around 100 years ago, there was the economic catastrophe of a war. There was a pandemic. There was a global trade war. There was other conflicts. There was the splintering of politics. There was a major financial crash, just as there was the economic catastrophe of Iraq and Afghanistan, the crash of 2008, the pandemic of 2021, etc., etc. So, you know, you can see how people behave. And what you do discover when you look at that is that when economics in democracies starts to splinter a little bit or take a massive downturn, then politics in democracies tends to take a down, tends to fracture as well. There's lessons there. Not that anyone seems to be taking any note of those lessons, but they are there for those who want to find them. So I would urge everyone to study a little bit of history, because they'll find lots of answers and lots of patterns which resonate today and help them make sense of what's going on in the world today. I mean, the bottom line is history is very much the compass that leads us to today and helps us prepare for the future. And why wouldn't you want to use that?
Yeah, absolutely spot on. Settle this one before we finish, James, if you could. Winston Churchill, of course, is the go-to example around the globe almost. You know, you mention a prominent leader, whether you're American, Australian, whether you're in India, whether you're in Japan, somebody at some point will mention Winston Churchill. But of course he does, and perhaps more so than ever before, does divide the room a little bit when people do a bit of a rabbit hole number on him. So good guy or bad guy? The man with a cigar, full house points or not?
Oh, no, he's a completely great guy. And the reason that people are able to debate him and have fevered discussions of this is largely because he was such a champion of personal freedom. Don't also forget the enormous impact of Franklin D. Roosevelt and his successor, Harry S. Truman, for shaping the post-World War world that we've been enjoying for the last 80 years as well. But no, Churchill is definitely a good guy.
Glad to hear it. What a point to finish on. James, lovely to see you. We will speak again, I hope. James Holland, the historian and author, Astorian, with us on the programme. Top bloke. Thank you to him. It is, isn't it, when you think about it, it's probably the only subject people will gravitate to, even if they don't call it that. You know, if your mate's reading a book on Dickens or something about the, as James just said, the Restoration or something grand like that, you don't think, oh, my mate Jack's become a historian. But you develop an interest in things. You suddenly, there's just one little nugget of information, isn't there, or a little factoid that you hear and you think, I want to know a bit more about that, which is why I thought that, the whole Victorian London thing, I'm absolutely fascinated by. And if you read novels not as distinct from history books, that are set in that era. Of course, it was a terrible time to exist. Absolutely horrific time. A family like mine, where I came from, a family like mine, we would have been in those horrible parts of slummy areas and given very little, and lifespan was almost non-existent, shoved up chimneys and God knows what else. So you can sort of romanticise it when you see it, and you think of Oliver and you think of all of those films and books that are set in that time. And I think maybe one of the reasons I think it's a bit attractive is because there are people alive today whose nan was a Victorian, because they were around at that. And you think, that's weird, right? It's just not that long ago. 0344 499 1000. Thoughts on that? More comments from you on the way. Loads to get through. 18 minutes after 3. This is Talk.
Neil Kinnock felt the Labour Party. He changed the Labour Party. He thought he might be the Prime Minister in 92. We didn't win. But he had that feeling for the Labour Party. That doesn't exist with Keir Starmer, I'm afraid. Look, I often say, Jeremy, the Labour Party is the nearest thing I've got to a religion. But if the Labour Party was the Church of England, Keir Starmer would be the chief executive of it.
But he's the God. It means he's your God right now.
Well, he's not the spiritual leader, is my point.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This from Jeffrey, who says, I'm an expat who lives in Belgium. It is supposed to be illegal if you don't vote, but it's very rare they follow it up if you don't. I think that's, I'd imagine the ache of following something up is absolutely massive, right? This one from Betty referenced the racist kids in nurseries He says, this nursery story is clearly nudge unit tactics to force parents to not speak their mind around kids so they can indoctrinate the next generation. Clear that all 16 to 21s are shifting right across West against the woke agenda. That's why Australia, UK, Canada are trying to ban social media and doubling down on propaganda in state media and schools. Yeah, I mean, some of that I think is probably right. I'm not sure about the ban on social media. That seems to be a bizarre reaction to politicians thinking they can sort the kids out, which they never really can. And I'll say this for the 1000th time. I know I'm not wrong on this. It's a red herring, the social media thing. What we're really talking about is about the internet. And if it's bad stuff that's out there, even if you had I know social media accelerates it. It makes conversations happen quite fast and in real time. But if it's bad stuff you're looking for, then you just need the internet. You don't even need to have heard of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, or Snap as we call it in our little cohort of age groups. So yeah, it wouldn't make any difference, would it? None whatsoever. Just go online. If you want to see something grim, it's all there. Just before we talk to Kevin in Basingstoke, Voice of Doom. Let's go through this again then. So this is the mystery voice. It's political. It's day one. Day one. Here's the voice we played you.
The voice of a Briton.
The voice of a Briton. Who is that? Now, I don't know the answer, by the way, but the most common guess we had was Nick Clegg, which is exactly what I said in the office when they played it to me. I said, well, it's Nick Clegg, isn't it? We've done Nick Clegg before. Apparently it's not Nick Clegg. Piers Morgan. Let's hear it again.
The voice of a Briton.
I can see why somebody would say Piers Morgan. David Cameron, no. Damien Green, no. Luke Akehurst. No. Me neither. No. Brian Warden. Chris Philp. Grant Shapps. David Miliband, no. Alistair Campbell, no. Mo Molam, no. In fact, we haven't got a right answer. The guys thought it was reasonably easy, this one. Hasn't gone on day one. It rolls over to tomorrow for day two. Back to your calls. Compulsory voting. Kevin in Basingstoke. What have you got for us, Kevin? Hi.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I think compulsory voting is a good idea. Jacob Rees-Mogg admitted that the reason the Conservatives brought in photo ID was to stop people voting Labour. And Reform UK wants to scrap postal votes. And I think the reason is because only 15% of Reform voters did it by post and 34% Labour voters did it by post. And
I also think, and you know, I don't say this to be unkind to anybody in Reform, but you know, that Trump thing of postal votes are all, you know, and they've worked, you know, pretty darn well. I don't doubt, you know, the level of corruption you could employ if you wanted to is there, but no more so than many other mechanisms you could fiddle an election. Postal voting is a mechanism that seems to have worked, and I wonder whether Reform have sort of jumped a bit on the Trump thing on that.
Well, yeah, because he said there was Reform said there was mass fraud by postal votes in Manchester when they had that recent by-election.
Yeah. That was alleged.
Manchester police looked into it and they said there was no evidence of fraud, and that cost £100,000 that investigation.
I know, and then of course people said, they're just saying that to cover it up. Well, no, I mean, we're not living in a film. You know, there wasn't any fraud that they could detect. Now, people will always have their own views and go, well, I think there were still areas, and of course any system will have abuse that runs around with it, but that's never changed.
In the last election, Nigel Farage did his own vote by postal voting. So, and also I think we should scrap donations to political parties. I mean, that was that Christopher Harborne, he donated $6 million to the Brexit Party, $12 million to Reform, and he's just given Nigel Farage £5 million himself.
I think I'm right in saying that he gave him that money before Nigel Farage was an MP.
Yeah, I know, but yeah, and then about 20 days later, he said, "Oh, I'm going to stand as an MP." So, I mean, did you give him $5 million so he would stand as an MP?
I mean, that's quite a big ask. Even if it is $5 million, you're going to change your entire life because I've given you some money to do it. Would you do it?
Well, for £5 million, I would. I mean,
so what are you complaining about then?
Why would he say that? He said he wouldn't. He said he wouldn't stand for an MP. He gets £5 million and he changes his mind. And also, I mean, Why? I mean, why? I mean, it's not just reform. I mean, loads of people give millions of pounds to political parties, but I mean, they don't give it to them out of the goodness of their heart. They give it to them because it benefits them.
Well,
I mean,
it is kind of weird because I've always been intrigued by this. You know, why do people give money to political parties? Well, it's not always because they want, you know, oh, I've got a secret policy, can you put it into action? Because that would be really easy to rumble that. But because they like the direction of travel or the flavour of a political party, and they've got the money to increase that party's chances of success, that's why they would give them money. So in that respect, so what?
Yeah, but that Christopher Harborn, he's multi.
This is the billionaire guy that lives in Thailand now, right?
Yeah, he gives the money. He makes his money through crypto, and then Nigel Farage's policy on crypto is the most generous of any.
He's always
other
loved a bit of crypto since he was a kid.
Yeah, I know, but
grew up on it. People had Action Men and Barbies. Nigel had crypto.
Yeah, I know, but what I'm saying is you can't. You're buying politicians. You're having massive influence because you've got lots of money.
But you might have influence on something that you already agree with, rather than something you want to change. And is there any?
Yeah,
I mean,
I know,
but by the way, I tend to agree with the overarching point here, Kevin, and that is that, you know, we have to look into how donations work. And I think over the years, you might know this more than me, I think they have changed some rules around it, but maybe they need to change some more.
Well, yeah, they might have changed some rules, but it's not gone far enough as far as I'm concerned, because why should somebody that's a million... I mean, Reform UK, we keep saying they're a new party. It costs a hell of a lot of money to run a party. It costs tens of millions of pounds. And if most of your money is coming from one person, then that person is, you know, amplifying a party because they're super rich.
But there is another way to look at that as well, of course. And I know this wouldn't be, not everybody would benefit from this, but, you know, the one thing that you would have to say about Reform is that they not exactly come out of nowhere. Of course, there's been a process of UKIP, and I know UKIP exists and it's very much separate, but from Nigel Farage's perspective and a few others, moved to the Brexit Party and then become Reform. Now, the amount of effort that it's taken, whether you like Nigel Farage or not, or Richard Tice or anybody, the amount of man-hours that those people and everyone behind it have put in is so vast that they felt, I think they would feel, that you could forever be in a two-party system because you need the Wonga to be in place in order to create a system where you could even begin to start a party and give it some profile. And I think that is, it might not be the answer to, so bring on big donations, but I think it partially shines a bit of light on it. It certainly would have helped them raise their profile in a kind of a sea of not quite anonymity, but where smaller parties simply can't get a foothold. And I think the Greens would probably echo that problem too. Kevin, I've got to move just for time. Brilliant call, though. Thank you for that. Ben, is it? That was Kevin. This is Ben in Amersham. Ben, what have you got for us? Hi.
I just want to pick up on a point another one of your callers said.
Yeah.
He said that none of the above was one of the largest options. I was wondering if you could form a political party called None of the Above.
That's a good point. I wonder... I'm sure somebody must have thought about it, because you might do quite well.
I mean, there's a party called Your Party, which is confusing enough. So
I wonder whether the Electoral Commission have already sort of put a ban on, you know, you can't call your party. Somebody must have given it a go. Even a sort of mischievous Edinburgh comedian who wants to write a book and dine out on it for about 10 years would have surely thought about that.
Yeah, and on the compulsory voting, I'm against it for the simple reason you need ID to vote now. And if you don't have the ID and you're forced to go vote, how will they be able to prosecute you?
Well, that's true. Do you support ID?
No, not really, because not everyone has a passport or driving license. Like, you can't afford a passport or you're ineligible to drive. I know there's a voter certificate you can get from the council.
From the local council.
I don't know how many people are going to get that.
Yeah, more people needed to have heard about it, didn't they? I'm not sure what I think about it. All I do think is that it was remarkably odd. You walk into a polling booth and just give your address and name, and they go, "There's a slip, go and vote," which is great because it's I know they look at your name on a list, but that doesn't mean it's me, does it? Could be my neighbour.
But I think voter fraud in person is a very negligible, whereas via post it's a lot more open to abuse.
Yeah.
And the thing with post is you don't need ID to vote by post.
This is very true. Ben, thank you very much indeed for that. Yeah, confusing times. I don't know if anybody's got the perfect election system. And you get to a country like the States where it's so big, and of course the way their system works, I'd love to explain it, but I literally don't have the knowledge, and I follow it to a degree. But they've, of course, got completely different systems, both in how they count the votes and the popular vote and the college votes and all that go with it. And state and county, and it probably makes perfect sense to the average American like ours do to us, but it is a little more complex. 0344 499 1000. We'll talk about flights and alcohol in a couple of moments' time. Have you ever done that thing at the airport when you've grabbed a swift pint at 3:45 in the morning because the Spoons down at Gatwick is open? Thoughts on that coming next with Adrian Mills. Keep it here. It's Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 25 to 4, I think that is. Yes, Kevin O'Sullivan's going to be here after the news at 4 o'clock. There's a lot going on in the airline industry. Well, if there is still an airline industry, because airlines are talking about axing May schedules over fears that jet fuel could, well, kind of run out, certainly reaching critically low levels. Let's speak with Adrian Mills, consumer expert, all-round good guy and pilot. Good afternoon to you, Adrian.
Yeah, don't fly with me, whatever you do. 13,000 flights cancelled in May. Now, although that sounds horrendous, and it's 2 million seats, there is still huge capacity within the British Airlines service to get you away on your holiday. And if I was going away in half term in May, I wouldn't be too worried. I would worry if there isn't a solution to the Middle East crisis by, say, the middle of June, because we have the lowest stockpile of fuel in this country across the whole of Europe. And what you'll discover, Heathrow, Gatwick, places like that, for many years you would have had flights leaving with perhaps just half a dozen people on it because they don't want to lose their slot. Once they lose their slot, it's almost impossible to get it back. Another airline will come in. So the government a couple of days ago introduced a situation where you may book with a particular airline, but you may be actually moved on to an allied airline, so to speak. Yeah. And that's really to save capacity and to save jet fuel. So at least the government are trying to do something to help.
Yeah, I mean, it's odd, isn't it? You sometimes look at loads of stories around the world, Adrian, at the moment, whether it's to do with this or something else, and you kind of wonder whether we're going back in time, you know. I mean, the most obvious one is, you think we used to have a thing called Concorde, didn't we? I mean, I never went on Concorde, but... so you used to be able to get to America quicker than you can now. Yeah. That's really odd. And here we are talking about a shortage of fuel to to be able to get planes to take off the ground and take you to your Beano in Marbella.
Well, what you've got to remember as well is if you go back enough years, flying was elite. People would wear their suits, the women would be in fantastic long dresses and whatever. Glorious. And actually, it's become much cheaper with all the low-cost airlines. Yeah. However, those prices inevitably will go up. And we're going to talk about in a minute, drunkards on the cheap flights. That is a complete nightmare. However, what you've got to bear in mind, 50% of the UK population have one flight a year. One flight. And 80% of the world's population have never set foot on an airline. So it is still, to a certain extent, an elite way of travel.
Yeah, it's interesting. When you look at those, 80% of people have never been on an aeroplane, and their circumstances would dictate, I suppose, that they're not likely to either anytime soon. You mentioned there the other story on this, Adrian, and this is the Ryanair boss, Michael O'Leary, who often makes the headlines for suggesting things like a thatched roof and an outside toilet on planes, and charging for a seat.
Or standing up on the plane.
Standing up, that was it, wasn't it, on a plane? I mean, they had it all worked out, the standing up thing, didn't they?
Yeah.
He's called for a ban on early morning airport alcohol sales, limiting passengers to just 2 drinks per boarding pass. Now, he's talking about on the plane or at the airport?
He's talking, I think he's talking about at the airport, because what he was suggesting was that you introduced like pub opening hours, so that if you're flying after 11 o'clock, you can grab a pint then, and that'll take you right through the afternoon and evening. On many occasions, I've had some very early flights going to Europe. I mean, I always remember one time thinking, oh, please tell me these guys are not going to be on my flight, like 5 o'clock in the morning, and there were half a dozen empty beer glasses on the table, and they were on to their 6th pint. However, when they all got on the plane, they all fell asleep for the duration of the flight. That's perfect. However, I don't know about you, but my social media is awash with videos of people having punch-ups, with kids screaming and people shouting. And, the rule surely should be these people should be banned for life if you're going to behave like that. Secondly, you should pay for the redirection of that airline. There is a crisis up there. And also, you're putting at risk hundreds of people's lives in an aeroplane, thousands of feet in the air. Not acceptable. Whether you actually tar everybody with that brush and say you can't drink, because the vast majority are sensible, but maybe he's right. Maybe it is. You can have 2 drinks, that's your lot.
Yeah, I've had sort of both experiences. I've done the nipping into, I mean, it's a bit bizarre, isn't it? I think some people only ever do it once because they can, and that's like 4 a.m. I was on some kind of press thing, and arrived at Gatwick, and there's 6 other journalists or whatever, and everyone said, oh, let's go for a pint. I'm thinking, let's have a pint. I was in bed half an hour ago. You're having a pint? What are you talking about? And I sort of went with it, and it was quite an uncomfortable pint. I remember that, and I don't think I really had any more. But the worst thing I had on a flight, I was going to Malaga. I was only going for 3 days, and I thought, right, I'm going to get ahead of the game. I'll take the first flight out, which I think is about 6 a.m. or something, and I happened to be sat, I don't know how this happened, I was sat within a group of 30 guys on a stag weekend.
Oh.
And I was
Horrendous.
in the middle. I'm sitting next to a bloke, the groom's dad, who's dressed up as Gloria Hunniford or something, and then there's somebody else who's, got a skirt on and
dressed up as Gloria Hunniford.
Good old Gloria, yes. Well, whatever he was dressed up. And then, of course, the drink started to come out, and it went on and on and on, and they did get louder. And they kind of adopted me as this, come on, mate, have a drink. Yeah, we'll buy it for you, don't worry. And I didn't want to know, but they did get progressively louder. They eventually called, is there a doctor on board? Because a woman had a panic attack at the back because of the noise was constant. But the airline, and it wasn't Ryanair, kept saying, right, if you don't quieten down, lads, and there was a bit of inappropriate language as well. If you don't quieten down, we're not going to serve you any more drinks. But they did keep serving them drinks, and that was what I thought was interesting. Because
but were these drinks they had to pay for?
Yes.
Because I think there is also a slight hypocrisy here with some of the airlines, that this is an added incentive to make extra money as by selling alcohol on the plane. Yeah. So you can't have it both ways. I think if you're on a stag do, I think you almost should be warned before you pay your ticket that's who you're going to be travelling with.
Yeah, it was a bit, it was fun for a bit, and they were mostly quite nice guys. They were all there having a laugh. I mean, their mate was getting married, they were there for a good reason. It wasn't a funeral or anything.
Sure.
But inevitably, and I'm watching this guy 2 seats down, he must have had... Oh, man, I mean, what's a flight to Malaga? 2.5 hours max?
Yeah.
And he must have had 10 brandies, as well as the beer that he had beforehand. And I kept thinking, because we arrive, if you get that early flight, you're there at 9 in the morning. I thought, well, what? Surely they didn't go out after that. I mean,
of course they will.
Or yes, be able to walk after that.
Yeah, no, I'd be asleep for about a fortnight, lying across. I can't do it. I like a drink in an evening. That's terrific, but that time in the morning, absolutely not. Yeah. And can I just take you back to what we were talking about a minute ago? There is actually, for people that are travelling, if you go to the government website, government.uk, and type in air passenger travel guide, there is actually quite a lot of explanations about, what might be happening in the forthcoming months. So that's quite handy. And also, just a little bit of consumer advice, pay with your credit card, because then you've got some form of insurance. Always buy travel insurance. I know a lot of people don't bother. Oh, I'm not going to spend 50 quid, 100 quid on some travel insurance. It would be really worth it. And also, if you're booking a hotel and a flight separately and your flight is cancelled, you'll get a refund for your flight, but you won't get a refund for your hotel because you booked it separately. And therefore, that's why a package tour, on many occasions, is a better bet, because you'll be fully covered.
Brilliant. Great info, good advice. Adrian, lovely to speak again. Thank you, Adrian Mills, consumer expert, and he's absolutely bang on. Check out the relevant places online. If you didn't quite grab what he said there, you'd be able to Google that stuff and find it. And the whole thing about payments and compensation, I think, is well known, and you will be aware a debit card won't cut it, but a credit card will, rather annoyingly. 0344 499 1000. This comes from Nigel. Afternoon, Ian. Anyone born on or after January the 1st, 2026 will get locked up if they ever look racist or say anything that could be interpreted as racist. If we get them young, we will stamp racism out for sure. Obviously, it only counts if you were born in this country. Interesting point from Nigel. Chris in the southwest. Afternoon, Ian. What are they going to do with these toddlers? Are they going to fast track them through the courts? Maybe they will. Toddler courts. It is. I won't go over the story if you missed it, but look it up. I mean, toddlers in nursery where staff are being encouraged to report them if they hear, or even ring 999 if they hear a child say something that's a little bit off the mark. A kid at that age is not a racist. Of course, there's going to be an exceptional circumstance where they might wheel out something that is so graphic they could only have collared it from home. And that may well be a point that somebody would go, well, maybe we just have a chat with the mum at the school, find out what's going on here. But generally speaking, children will say wacky stuff, weird stuff, sometimes offensive stuff. They will swear because they don't know the meaning of the word. They will have a whole load of bizarre, often inappropriate things in their lexicon and their armoury of words that they're developing. And it may come across as offensive. There might literally be something as offensive. But are we really saying that 3-year-olds are racists? I mean, that's the question you really need to ask. And do you need to be bothering 999 with a phone call? Matthew's in Warrington on compulsory voting. Matthew, what have you got for us?
Hi, mate. I think you should have compulsory voting. But I also think that voting should be at the weekend and not in the week, because I've done it myself. You've been out on a 12-hour shift. You get in at 6 o'clock. You have your tea, you put your feet up and you go, oh, I'm going to go to the polling station.
If you remember, because sometimes you go, oh, God, yeah. It's like 5 to 10.
Oh, you forget all about it, yeah. But, I do believe that. I think they used to do it at weekends. I don't know. But it just doesn't make sense because you get a better turnout. And I think more people will show a bit more interest in it. But I also think if you're standing up for election, there must be some kind of, criteria that you're a little bit whiter than white, where you've not got any, skeletons in your closet or you're an terrorist, or you've got to be a sort of a decent citizen.
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, you're right about that. I don't know why. Do you know the reason, Matthew, why voting is on a Thursday?
I think it's to do with council workers.
Is it? Because
they work. Yeah, I think it's to do because the council work and they don't really work weekends, do they? I'm not 100% sure.
But there are countries that do vote because often, when you turn the news on at the weekend, they say, the Hungary election results are in, and it's a Sunday.
I think they're missing a trick. I think more people would just go. If you're sat there on a Sunday or a Saturday, go and have a vote before I go to the pub for a pint, or people will gather around and talk about it more. Where now, it's like, Thursday, it's back end of week, you've been working all week, you're a bit cream crackered and...
Yeah, no, I totally get it. It's just a weird day. I mean, I would understand it more if it was a Monday or a Friday. Thursday, that's totally random, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but I presume they must do it a Thursday, do the count on a Friday, if there's any little... And then they all go and put the feet up for the weekend. I don't know. He must be.
Here you go, Matthew. I've got the answer for you. I've just been given this. So since 1918, it's always been on a Thursday. On Fridays, voters were paid their wages, and if they went for a drink in a pub, they'd be subject to pressure from the conservative brewing interests. While on Sundays, they would be subject to the influence of free church ministers who are generally liberal in persuasion. Therefore, they chose the day that's furthest from influence of either publicans or vicars. I love that explanation. That's absolutely brilliant. I hope that's true. That's just brilliant.
But what are we under the influence now? Zach.
That's true. Yeah, that's very true.
Zach, Keir Starmer, Gaza. Oh, I think that needs a bit of a review, doesn't it?
I think we need to have a look at what makes up a political party these days in this country.
That's good bells to that, mate. Yeah. I'm well happy with that.
Listen, Matthew, great call. Thank you, mate. Have a lovely Thursday, which is tomorrow, of course, election day for some. Matthew in Warrington, 0344 499 1000. That is where you'll find us. We'll take a couple more calls. We've got Kevin O'Sullivan coming in. It's busy. Coming up on 10 to 4. This is Talk.
Kinnock felt the Labour Party. He changed the Labour Party. He thought he might be the Prime Minister in 92. We didn't win. But he had that feeling for the Labour Party. That doesn't exist with Keir Starmer, I'm afraid. Look, I often say, Jeremy, the Labour Party is the nearest thing I've got to a religion. But if the Labour Party was the Church of England, Keir Starmer would be the chief executive of it.
Well, he's the God. It means he's your God right now.
Well, he's not the spiritual leader, is my point.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. Dorian says, afternoon, Ian. The civil service that are not turning up for work, are they still getting their London allowance? Yeah, well, that was raised, wasn't it, by our guest at the time when we were talking about this, and I think the answer is yes. And I had no idea why you would be, which could be like a 5,000 quid addition to your pay packet, based on the idea that you've got to come into London, so the travel is more expensive, and of course to function in London, which may involve other forms of transport while you're there, not exclusively a London thing, and everything else is more expensive, or something of that nature. Maybe because you moved there as well, I don't know. But either way, I think it still applies. Sean in Grimsby says, replacing Starmer with Burnham is like pooping your pants and only changing your top. You're still going to have to walk around in the same mess you created in the first place. I get it. What an image. We had a similar analogy based on that quite recently about something else, didn't we? About no, it'll come back to us. Do you remember it, Phil? Somebody came up with a clothes-changing analogy that was just gold. I'm sure we'll remember. Derek is in Manchester on compulsory voting. Derek, afternoon.
Hello, Ian. Compulsory voting.
Yeah.
I could quite accept it as long as they change the law so that an election manifesto becomes a legally binding document, and MPs are then held accountable for any damage they cause to this country. Because so far we've got a bunch of MPs who the worst punishment they get every 4 years when they totally knacker the country up, the worst punishment they get is moved to the back benches and sat on the opposite side on nearly the same pay. Yeah. And it's absolutely ridiculous.
What do you do, though, Derek? What do you do if a party's manifesto says we will aspire or aim to recruit another 10,000 nurses, and by the time they get to election, they've got 8,000? So they haven't reached 10,000, but they said they're going to aspire to it. What do we do with that?
Well, you use what we used to have in this country, which was common sense before we became an uncommon people. You use common sense, don't you? You say, well, all right, they've tried the best. But at the end of the day, when we get a government like we've got now, we're going to stop the votes, and then we get into a record sort of 200,000 in the last 8 years. Then you turn around and you say, right, we're holding you to account. You're being sued by the public for what you've done. You've took wages under false pretenses. Basically, that's what they're doing.
So they wouldn't be able to argue that circumstances change. I don't know, there was a global recession or something.
Yeah, but they use excuses like this on a regular basis, don't they?
They do all the time. It's all the time. It's always somebody else's fault. They never say, no, we tried to do something, but we weren't good enough.
Yeah, well, they're exactly what you say. They're excuses. They're not. If the likes of a party came in and said, right, we are now going to deport all your illegal immigrants, and we're going to put any that shouldn't be in detention camps, then, if they come into power and then do not even make a start to do something like that, surely we should have the power to get rid of them.
Yeah.
Where the system we've got is so ridiculous that it's untrue. We've got these charlatans that have come into power on a pack of lies, and they're now in. We stuck with them for 5 years. They're trying to take us back into Europe, which no one asked them to do, and they certainly never said they were going to do it. Yet we can't even stop them doing it. How ridiculous is that?
Yeah, it's all a bit upside down, isn't it, Derek? There's no doubt about that. Listen, we've got to run, but thank you, Derek in Manchester. Great call on compulsory voting. Brad in Cambridge says, no fear of Rayner getting her taxes sorted out anytime soon. All the civil service are logging in from the car park and then going out with their mates. Yes, very true. They're not around. They don't go to work. Reference kids at nursery being reported for hate crimes and racism. Nicola says, if you ask the average 5-year-old to describe their friend, the colour of their skin will not come into it. If it does, then you need to look to the parents, as children are not born racist. Kids do begin to pick out attributes, and the obvious one is not about skin colour, it's about hair colour. So if you're, or it might be about hairstyle. So a non-white kid, say a black kid with an afro as an obvious example, may well get, at the very least, questioned about having a different haircut before they would mention the colour of a kid's skin. A ginger kid, now, I'm not comparing gingerness with race for 1 second. I'm talking about through the lens of a kid who's the only kid in the class with ginger hair, would also potentially be marked out in the same kind of way. My point is, at that age, this is not about offence. This is not about being racist or gingerist or any otherist. This is just kids saying what they see. And some kids, for various reasons, are completely literal. They will say it and they'll sometimes make a joke about it. Doesn't mean they're racist in any shape, or homophobic, sexist, whatever the example is in this case. Kevin O'Sullivan is here.
It's about like pillorying the parents, isn't it? That it's not about the kids. These kids are obviously coming from a racist household. Let's go and get the mum and dad. That's what that's about. Yeah. Absolutely ridiculous. Also, you know, compulsory voting. I think it's an abomination. It's an absolutely terrible idea.
They gave it a go. Well, they do it in Australia, but it doesn't really work, does it?
In a free democracy, you must have the right to be apathetic, to not bother to vote. You might even aggressively not vote. Yeah. It should be an available option to people.